The governor can't make any decisions here.
That's the one stubby. About that long.
You can do something fancy like that.
We're good?
Good order.
Did you play with it? Did it record audio?
Different ones. We did last day when we said you could order.
If something doesn't work right.
Yeah, Scott.
Oh, okay.
I'll be down here for another at least 5 minutes.
I think we're good.
Yeah.
I don't see why not. Thanks for your help. Thanks for checking in on us.
What are they? What do they call them on the wires? Just write it in as
Yeah, you want some?
it's like it might be on there now.
Right. Yeah. I was actually sticking my tongue.
Smart phone. That's the smart phone.
No, I was really mixed food.
The only thing like they have better is like.
Don't forget sweet potato pie. That's good.
Yeah, it's like sometimes they don't tread on super quick.
Fago? You want a Fago?
No, that's why I say they buy like that GE, one grade, one angle.
Yeah. Go for the grave.
Oh, yeah.
I got a couple. I got one of those.
Thanks for good, huh?
I think so. Miss anybody?
Oh, probably. It's okay.
If you're not here, say you're not here.
Yeah. So let me see who we got on Skype here. We got, so we kind of know. Yeah, so we got John on there. Oh, okay. So that should be good. All right, thanks guys for coming here for this. This is Chris. We got Jim. They're Appion reps, as you know. If you don't know, you should know. We're buying the Appion machines now. So not only is this a good class on just best practices as far as refrigerant recovery and evacuation, but it's also how to use their stuff. Like, they got a lot of good stuff. So you guys are lucky, and you have 2 members of the tool committee in here tonight. Foreman White and Foreman Eshpeter. So if you see anything up here that you think would benefit you in your job, whether you're service or SPTI, those are the guys to talk to as far as how to get things put on the list. So keep that in mind, because we're all about doing things more efficient and best practices at McDonald Miller, as you know. So with that, if you didn't get any food, get some food. And if you didn't get a chance to sign in, make sure you sign in. If you're not on the list, just add your name, whatever. I think Chris said this can be about 2 hours or so.
So usually it'd be looking at an hour and a half, 2 hours, depends on how rambunctious you guys are.
Yeah, so not bad at all. So we'll get you out of here in time to go get a beer.
Questions are good though. So as Seth said, my name is Chris Hatcher. I'm the senior technical trainer for Appion. You know, you guys are starting to use G5 Twin, right? You guys pretty well familiar with it overall. You guys familiar with any of the other products that we have on show here? Ooh, ah. We're probably best well known for the G5 Twin. It's our flagship model. We're going to go over best practice where it comes to recovery. We're going to go back to evacuation, maybe touch a little charging, things like that. If at any time I say something that does not sit well with you, you've heard something different, doesn't make sense, you have a question, for the group this big, if you have that question, at least one other person in this group will have the exact same questions. You're helping each other out. Ask questions. I will try to give you a shortest answer as possible. Sometimes, especially when we get to the vacuum, that is not possible. But I'll try to be concise. If it makes sense, I can try to phrase it a different way, you know, yada, yada, yada. So we'll start with Appion. We're a Colorado-based manufacturer based out of Englewood, Colorado. That's just South Denver. If you noticed on all your G5 Twins and all our products, we have this thing called the Star Performance. You guys know what that is? Any guesses what a Star Performance is?
Testing program?
So the idea of star performance is more of a philosophy. So the idea is we all have that one guy that we work with, right? We'll call him Bob. He's usually the best. He's got the best tools, the best know-how, best knowledge, best way to do it. If you're having a problem on a job, you call Bob, right? We don't think of that guy top of our heads. He's the star performer for your company. He's the guy you can always turn to, you can always trust, rely on. They have the best up-to-date knowledge, right? Then you have the opposite end, we'll call him Tim. Tim's usually the opposite of Bob. Tim's the guy that if you get told to go work with Tim, he's going to drag his feet. He's not going to do much for you. He's going to make more work for you in the long run. He cuts every corner you can, right? Our idea is to make you all into Bobs, the star performers of your company, but the only way to get there is by giving you the best tools and the best training so you can be the best at your job. Pretty simple. Make sense? So what we try to do is we try to make you be the best by making you the best and giving you the best. So that was a slight delay. So we usually start with this quick little story. I don't know if you guys are aware, but refrigeration was originally invented in 1748 in Scotland, right? No one actually cared though. It was invented and they said, well, that's cool. Then in 1804, the first person to say, hey, maybe I could make something out of that. They created a design, it actually was in the United States. He made a design, a blueprint, or a plan to make an artificial refrigeration cycle. Nobody cared. They said, hey, that's cool. I don't see any practical application to having an artificial refrigeration that we can possibly use. It wasn't until 1844, it was talking about almost 100 years between when it was first invented before it was first created. That was, they were making a refrigeration system to help with the yellow fever. So it's 100 years before they said, hey, this is a really cool technology, but we don't care, to, oh, let's actually make this. Does this sound familiar to the HVAC industry in general sometimes? Right? We have some really advanced technology, very energy efficient technology, and you go and you tell a customer and they go, what? Cool, why do I care? That's expensive. I don't see any practical use for it, right? Really what it comes down to is without modern refrigeration, we would not have modern society. Think of all the food we're eating right now. Where did that chicken come from? Farm. Where's that farm? Could be somewhere, right? Could be somewhere very far away. Without refrigeration, is it a possibility that we could have the same chicken? The same food? We have food from across the world. In fact, it's in the grocery store. It's because we can have refrigeration. Because we can actually live in places like Louisiana and Houston sometimes, when there's not flooding, obviously. Have you guys been down there during the summer? 120 degrees. You guys had 110 degrees this summer, right?
Oh, no, but anyway, go there.
But with places that are really humid, really hot, do you want to live down there? No. Society did not exist down there. That's why they had refrigeration. It allows us to live in areas that would not normally have living. So it's very important. We know we can have a big impact on life. That's why, again, our philosophy is to try to get you the best that you can be so that you can affect the environment and, everything that goes with it. So, are you guys familiar with the R22 phase out? CFC, HGFCs, you guys heard one or two things about this. It's been in the news. The president used to talk about it. Things like that. Right? You guys buying R22?
By the pallet.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. How much is it?
$700 a jug.
So there are areas, California, that will be over $1,000. They were already $1,000 this year. With the phase out, it's going to become harder and harder to get to. We need to be familiar with this, but you guys are pretty familiar with this already, right? So we can skip this. Yeah. So we'll jump right into it now. All right. So we always start with, why do we recover? What are the three primary reasons? Any guesses?
Not producing it anymore.
Required by law.
There we go. No, someone that reads the board, right? I believe in giving answers, so you guys can shout out the answers, right? It is required by law, right? Montreal Protocol. We all have our 608s. Did you guys hear about the guy 2 years ago now? Got 31 months in a federal prison for venting refrigerant. $10,000 fine, 31 months in federal. It's a federal crime.
How much?
Yeah,
how much? Well, it wasn't about how much. It was the fact that he decided to cut line on top of the roof in front of 5 police officers. Talking about something that's not recommended. That is a true story. I was in the ARC News. Yes, it is illegal because we know about, second reason? There we go. You can say it louder. Say it again.
Environmental.
Yeah, we all about the ozone depletion. You can't read it? We'll read it for you. Don't worry. We'll have our rest of the right. We all know about the ozone depletion of the chlorine molecules. That's why we phased it out. That's why the Montreal Protocol was made. That's why we made it illegal. There is a $10,000 or up to there's $10,000 bounty for reporting somebody because it has some negative effects. Now, we're not going to get into the politics of the whole global warming potential, but have you guys ever vented refrigerant on grass? Don't admit to it. What would happen when you vent refrigerant on grass? You would usually kill the grass. It is a chemical. It is a chemical. It is bad for the environment. If you pour refrigerant, onto someone's award-winning rose bushes, do you think you're going to get a happy phone call the next day when the rose bushes start dying?
I don't know what happened.
Yeah, no idea, right? So it is required by our law, it's environmentally sound, and then we go back to, what's the cost of R22? You said $700. You guys are going to buy the pallet. It will continue to rise. They will no longer be able to, I can't quickly get back and forth, can I? They will no longer be able to sell virgin refrigerant in 2030, period, and stop. Right now, the EPA estimates that only 30% of refrigerant is being recovered in the United States. 30%. So if we are not recovering it, and the only way to get R22 after it's no longer be sold virgin refrigerant is by recovering it and allowing them to recycle it and sell it back to us. If we keep on sending it into the atmosphere, what's the cost going to keep on doing? It's going to exponentially increase. We've seen this before. So the importance is to recover the refrigerant as quickly as possible so that we can make our money back, don't go to jail, and don't hurt the planet, right? Pretty simple? Okay. So we start with our recovery machines. That's what our recovery machines are for, R2, recover refrigerant, right? So we have the G5 Twin. You guys are probably pretty familiar with this one now, I'd assume. You guys ever seen the G1 single? G1 single is for the residential guys that $100 to them, they think they would break their business if they spent $100 more. The G1 is the G5 cut in half. This is the last time I'll ever mention the G1 single because it has no bearing on you guys whatsoever. Personally, I don't even like talking about it because it is about a quarter the speed of the G5 now. So it is green, but that's about all I'll say about it. All right, so when it comes to recovery, how long does it take to recover a job? And it's the correct answer, right? I always get worried and say, oh, I can recover a job in an hour, right? Every job, no matter what? You guys ever talk to guys like that? So, somebody has, all right. So when it comes to recovery, everything is dictated by this equation. This is called the mass flow rate equation. When we optimize the mass flow rate equation, we can maximize the speed of the recovery as a job. So all this means is it's the density of the refrigerant that we're recovering times the cross-sectional area of the hose. Sorry, but I can talk English sometimes. And the velocity of the machine allows us to pump it. Right? Makes sense? We're all familiar with the cross-sectional area. And this is just to help you guys jog memory and whatnot. So we're going to walk through this equation, and we maximize this equation and maximize their speed overall. That's the way we can best practice recovery refrigerant as fast as possible. So we'll start with density. We'll walk through this one at a time. So liquid refrigerant R410A is anywhere between liquid refrigerant is anywhere between 100 to 300 times more dense than vapor refrigerant. For R410A, we're looking at a difference between 64 pounds per cubic foot and 0.2 pounds per cubic foot. So if you can recover 1 cubic foot, would you rather recover liquid or vapor? Why? Because we can move more of it at once, right? So right now, are you guys recovering refrigerant in liquid phase?
I'd try if it's we know where it's
We're
at.
hoping our best, right? So right now with the G5, you guys are out in the field working with it. Have you guys ever had any issues? Nope, machine's perfect, no issues whatsoever ever? You guys ever blown the output gauge? Yeah. You guys have newer machines. Ever heard that the fan would fail? That's kind of the older ones would do that. Yeah, fan would fail. You guys ever notice the tanks get really hot during recovery? Right? Those are all directly related to each other. Those are the most common issues that we run into during the recovery process of the G5 because we're going so fast. What it actually comes down to is when you have all those things happen, or just one of those three things happen, it is an indication that you have an input or output restriction, and you are no longer pumping liquid refrigerant at any way, shape, or form. So if we're pumping vapor, it's going to slow down the recovery process. But not just that, when you're pumping, what's this? Service valve. So when you guys go on your job, when there's a service valve, I know there's not always a service valve, do you take out your cores before recovery?
Yes.
Right now we're looking at about 80% of contractors nationwide do not ever remove their valve cores, ever. They don't remove them for recovery, they don't remove them for evacuation, they don't even remove them for brazing. The number of jobs that we've gone on with contractors across the country, we've tried to take out the valve core and found out that it's melted in place because it was brazed in. Yeah. It should be ridiculous, right? But when it comes to recovery, You try to pump through this right here. This is now a fixed orifice expansion device. Right? How do you make liquid turn to vapor? We've actually measured up to 80 degrees superheat coming off one of these during the recovery process. What happens when you compress superheated vapor into a small cylinder, say your recovery cylinder? It's going to get hot, right? Because we're always recovering is always the hottest state possible. We're going to put more superheated vapor inside a tank, builds up pressure. More pressure, more temperature. We all know the PV, NRT, right? More pressure means more temperature. More temperature means more pressure. We're going to add more and more refrigerant on top of it. We're going to add more pressure, more temperature, right? These gauges are rated to 700 psi. We've actually removed a lot of restrictions. We did a test. We found that pumping R410A or high pressure refrigerants through this, not taking this out with the 80 degrees superheat, we've actually measured up to a 3,000 psi spike internally on the machine. Because it's pumping a superheated vapor, it's pumping against that superheated vapor, it's pushing against the machine itself, slows down the recovery process, and damage your output gauge because they're 700 psi rated. 3,000 psi is not going to be good on a 700 psi machine, right? Same thing with the fan. We'll get into that one in a second. So we say first and foremost, you should remove your Schrader cores, right? Mini splits, whatever. If there's a service port, take it out. How do you take it out? Core removal tool, right? This thing right here, right? So we were talking about you were at the HVAC Excellence, right? Do you know they were doing that contest? All the trainers from across the country were doing this contest with the ESCO group. So they had 20 of the top trainers in the country, and each manufacturer was asked to do something to test them. We had asked them to set up a vacuum pump, so they had to use a Schrader core tool. Out of 20 instructors that were at this contest, 10 did not know how to use a Schrader core tool properly. For those of you who know percentages, that is 50%.
And that's how you met Seth?
So, as a matter of...
Come in and show how to do it.
Yeah. So as a matter of course, I'm going to show you real fast how to use a Schrader core tool. Please don't feel patronized. If 50% of people don't know how to use it, and the teaching level, we're just going to cover our basis here. Screw it on, take the core out, right? Blank it off. Our core tools are vacuum certified at 20 microns. This give you a 20 micron rating into the system. This side port right here, though, what's that?
Schrader valve.
There's another Schrader valve in here. Do you put your hose right here? I cannot tell you the number of phone calls our factory gets. I sat through your training class, they say. I took my Schrader core out, you say, and the pump is still not operating efficiently. We're sorry, blah, blah, blah. Walk us through your setup. I took the core out. I put my hose in that side port right where it shows. What does that do? Absolutely nothing. The secret is you unscrew the back. Magically, that's where we can put hoses. This is supposed to have a Schrader core tool in because that's where we put gauges, right? This is not where you put your hoses. In fact, if you're using an Appion hose, we do not have core depressors. So, make sense? No major questions on that?
Does anybody not have a Schrader core remover? All right.
Does anybody have one that doesn't have a ball valve on it?
Anybody have one that's vacuum certified? I'll pass it around. Make sure you take this thing out first. Don't try to close it on us. All right. So we say before you do anything when on recovery or an evacuation on a job, you should take the Schrader core out first and foremost, right? If you do not have a Schrader core, do you need a core depressor?
No.
Schrader cores will block about 90% of the flow. That's why they're fixed orifice, right? Core depressors will block a further 50% of the remaining 10% of the flow, right? It's making it a much more, it's restricting the flow. It's an input restriction. It's acting like an expansion device. We don't want it. We want to maximize the flow because when we maximize the flow, we allow the pump to see liquid refrigerant, which is what we want because we want to move the liquid first and foremost. Again, like I said, Appion hoses do not come with core depressors because we say first and foremost, take the core out. A bunch of those teachers would not take the cores out. We wouldn't even use one and just put our hoses on there without looking at them. If you put a hose and a core depressor on a core, what happens? You can evacuate a hose real fast. That's what I'll tell you right now. All right, not that hard. So what size hoses are you using when you recover? Quarter-inch. Right now, about 80% of contractors nationwide use quarter-inch hoses. Quarter-inch hoses, more often than not, will have something on the side of it that starts with a C. You know what that is? It's what describes the hose.
Rappy?
Called it a charging, right? They're all called charging hoses. Quarter-inch hoses are designed for one thing only. What is that? Charging, right? A quarter-inch hose is a capillary tube. Capillary tube is actually an expansion device. They're not nearly as pronounced as the Schrader core left in, but they still are an expansion device. They're designed to resist and regulate flow during charging. Do we want to resist and regulate flow during recovery? No, right? We want to have maximum flow. So we know by that equation, a larger cross-sectional area should increase our flow, right? However, we have our half-inch hoses here. The half-inch hose is actually slower than a 3/8 hose during recovery. Kind of a little counterintuitive, right? What it comes down to is that our 3/8 hose has 1/4-inch fittings on both ends because the valve core tool is 1/4-inch fittings. Now, somebody's probably thinking the question right now, what is it? The design flaw in the hose?
Still restriction range to it.
Yeah, what's the point of a 3/8 hose that's 1/4-inch fittings? It won't get any faster. So we do get a slight restriction in flow with the 1/4-inch fittings. We have the 1/4-inch fittings because it's more or less industry standard. However, when we think that you don't get any benefit from it because there's 1/4-inch fittings, that's because as humans we're used to dealing with one fluid more than any other. What is that? What liquid? Water, right? If we were pumping water through this hose, a 3/8 hose 1/4-inch fitting pumping water, you would not get more flow than the 1/4-inch fitting would allow because water is a non-compressible fluid. Luckily, we are not pumping water. What are we pumping? Refrigerant is a compressible fluid. It is a more or less semi-compressible fluid. We do get a slight slowdown at the fitting, but we get a massive overall increase in speed of the 3/8 hose itself. So we always use the analogy, it's kind of like driving down a highway and you hit a toll. You guys have 1 or 2 tolls in Seattle? Right? We all know what a toll is, I should ask?
Yeah.
Right? What happens when you hit a toll?
You just keep that.
Right. The old style where you put the coins in the thing, right? It's going to slow you down. So what happens when you get through the toll and there's no traffic? Speed back up. The net speed increase from the 3/8 hose with the 1/4-inch fitting is much greater. Now, like I said, though, the half-inch hose, which has 1/4-inch and 3/8 fitting, is slower than the 3/8 hose overall for recovery. Now, yes, we have about a 1/4-inch hose compared to a half-inch hose, about 4 times more cross-section area. The 3/8 hose only has about, I'd say, about double, a little bit more than that. So you would think it'd be greater. But what ends up happening during recovery now is when you go from a 1/4-inch to a half-inch, you get too much room for expansion, right? When you expand rapidly, you end up with this liquid vapor mixture, and you end up lowering your density of the refrigerant. So the 3/8 hose has enough to keep it all as a liquid. The half-inch hose, when it goes from that 1/4-inch to half-inch, it will expand rapidly and become a liquid vapor and drops your density. So we cut times by 4 by going to the half-inch hose compared to 1/4-inch. But instead of 300 times more dense refrigerant, we're now only pumping 150 times more dense refrigerant. So the net benefit is much less because we're not pumping the density that we want to pump. So that's why we recommend the 3/8 hose with 1/4-inch fittings over the half-inch hose with 1/4-inch and 3/8 fittings, and over a 1/4-inch hose entirely, because the 1/4-inch hose is kind of like driving down the highway and hitting traffic, right? One lane is open because of this construction. How fast can you go? Not very fast, right? So Appion also does not recommend the use of manifolds during recovery. I'm sure we've all been trained, right? The 2 1/4-inch hoses, the red and the blue, goes up the manifold, goes down to the other one, right? So you all familiar with head pressure? Right? The longer the hose, increased head pressure, slow recovery. So actually we do not recommend manifolds because it ends up being a slow recovery process because you're pumping more length than you need to. So I'll get into here in a little bit how to do a both sides recovery job. We'll start about a 10-ton system. It's still transferable to larger systems as well. But 3/8 hose makes sense? Any questions on that? We can get into the dark, dirty word of push pull here in a second. So, February 2016, we got reevaluated by UL. For our 410A systems, we can pump at 17.2 pounds per minute direct liquid rate. We talked about we want the machine to have liquid. If we move liquid, we move liquid faster, right? Are you guys currently getting that type of speed?
Maybe since we have the G5 twin.
Maybe, yeah. But that's for liquid. If we're not pumping liquid, you're not getting that speed. Vapor, more or less, doesn't change too much because we're limited by the density of the vapor. We can do liquid, we can do vapor. Have you guys ever heard recovery machines can't pump liquid? It's in textbooks sometimes. Some teachers will train it. Well, what it comes down to is the original design. So our founder was also the founder of what's called Promax, or what used to be called Promax. I don't know if they're still... You guys know what Promax is? The blue machines for recovery? They were the first portable recovery machine that didn't blow up. There's a fun story behind that one. I'll tell you that later. So have you guys ever used the ones before they were portable, or ever seen one in a museum? Have one floating around your shop, about 350 pounds on a cart. So you guys ever seen one of those? Yours didn't have a cart. You had to have 5 guys lift it up. How do you get that on top of the roof? How do you get one of the? How do you get a 350-pound machine on top of the roof? Apprentices, cranes. A lot of guys will say a 600-foot hose. Right? We know that's going to be a little slow, right? So we know that if the machine's not portable, and that's probably the correct answer, sadly, people aren't going to recover. They're going to skip the job. That's too much effort. We're not going to do it. So we had to make the machine portable. Where's most of the weight on a recovery machine? The motor, right? The motor's the largest weight. So to get it portable, we had to put a smaller horsepower motor in it. How do you design for a smaller horsepower motor? You make it do less work, right? So originally, the design that he made was to fill the crankcase with the refrigerant. The refrigerant's now going to have a positive pressure that we put inside a backside pressure, right? That's going to build up to allow a pressure differential across the piston, which means we have a smaller horsepower motor because it has to do less work because we're using the refrigerant to pump forwards, right? We're allowing the machine now to be smaller because we load the work by making refrigerant work for us. Simple enough, right? We say the first one that didn't blow up because the first one that came out actually did try doing something similar to this, and it built too much pressure up, and they actually blew up. He told me the story once. We'll share that offline. But there is an inherent design flaw with this. What's in the refrigerant when we're recovering? What else? Contaminants, right? A little acid, sludge, copper, right? If you're flooding your crankcase where all your ball bearings are, your seals are, your greases, what's going to happen to it with all that contamination going in there? Yeah, you wash out the oil and grease, destroy your O-rings and your ball bearings. The number one failure of this type of design, which is still used by about 60% of recovery machines on the market to this day, is that you destroy the crankcase of your recovery machine. Not only that, have you guys ever noticed with other machines, when you first start using them, they start off great, but then about a week later, you notice they're slowing down a lot the more I'm using them, right? The reason why is because it's called a direct wear point. So every time that piston would hit the peak and the trough of its compression cycle, it's hitting hard. It's a lot of pressure it's dealing with. Eventually, the peak and the trough would build in what's called slosh, right? So each compression cycle becomes less and less. The machine gets slower and slower. You guys can see the metal wear itself out. The machine will get slower over the life of the machine, over the life of it as you pump more and more through it. The reason why they say you can't give liquid into it, because if you flood this entire crankcase with liquid, there's no pressure differential when you're pumping the refrigerant. That's why traditionally they say to throttle the machine, right? They say when you're recovering it, you're going to turn it down. That adds an input restriction. Input restriction acts like an expansion device. You get an expansion device, you fill vapor inside of here rather than liquid. You minimize the wear and tear on your machine itself. So knowing these design flaws, since he designed it originally, he went and designed the G5 Twin. Then on the next level. The first thing that he did was he added an isolated crankcase. So there is no refrigerant inside the crankcase anymore. You're not exposing the ball bearings and the grease to all that refrigerant corrosive substance. He made it so it was horizontally opposing pistons with a second piston. That way every stroke got more compression cycles to it, and there's no direct wear point. So now there's no refrigerant inside the crankcase. You can give it straight liquid because now we're worried about slugging out the machine. So now it can keep on pumping, right? So by doing this, it allowed us to have the liquid refrigerant actually go to the machine as long as you give it liquid refrigerant. So we always get the question, why don't we have a purge valve too? You guys ever notice that?
Yeah.
Okay. What's a purge valve for? Purging the machine, right? It's purging the crankcase of the machine, which is where most of the refrigerant is. We don't have any refrigerant in our crankcase, therefore we don't need a purge valve. According to the EPA, we're considered de minimis anything inside the machine. Make sense?
I think that was for when you're done, right?
Yeah, at the end, they will usually...
Pick out the crankcase guts.
Yes, but the issue with that, though, it essentially replumbs it and uses its own piston to purge itself out. The lower the machine is, though, the wear on the machine will make it so it can't purge itself. And now we're worried about cross-contamination. It increases the chance of cross-contamination as well. So there's that going for it.
So what's considered in the machine is considered de minimis?
By the EPA, it's considered de minimis. We can minimize it, because what ends up happening, or we'll walk you all the way through it, is there could be what seems to be a lot in there if we leave liquid in the machine, or leave a lot of liquid to condense in the machine. We're trying to minimize that when we're done as well. That's the other end. We want to recover as fast as possible the front. leave as low refrigerant when we're done. So that's the design. We always say, just remember, G5 Twin, any recovery machine, they are essentially glorified condensing units. Right? What's one of the most important things to any condensing unit? Airflow. You guys hear about the old lady who didn't like all the airflow coming out for condensers, so you put a plywood thing on it? What happened to that? Yeah, he killed it. Same story happened to the contractor who decided that he didn't like all the airflow because it was raining, so he put a box over the G5 Twin. What happened to that G5 Twin? Yeah. So we have what's called a 600 CFM plus fan. We say plus because our old red fan, the one that used to fail occasionally, when they have all these input and out restrictions, we updated it to the blue. And the reason why it would fail is because we're geared up for our motor. If we increase the workload on the motor, what happens to the motor? Not just heats up and burns up, it slows down. Increased workload will slow it down, right? But if you're geared up from it and one slows down, what's the other one going to do? It's supposed to slow down. The old red fan sometimes wouldn't though, and so we found that occasionally had the red fan would fail. So we upgraded to the blue fan because we always constantly are improving our product based on your guys' feedback. Blue fan, more aggressive blades, 20% more airflow, and now it's got a slip clutch mechanism in it so that if it slows down because you're not using it fully correctly or you have an output or input restriction, it doesn't fail on you. We haven't had a failure of the blue fan in over 3 years now. If you have a red fan, you can upgrade to the blue fan. Red fan still works fine, but this also makes your machine a little bit more efficient because more airflow makes your condenser more efficient, condense more effectively, you recover more effectively. Any questions on that? Pretty self-explanatory. So when we're recovering, right, we got the shredded cores removed with the shredded core tool. We got the 3/8 hose straight to the input of the machine. We got it open all the way, right? No throttling. We don't need to throttle. You can actually damage the machine by throttling. We recommend, what size hose do you think going out? All right, 3/8 in, 3/8 out. Makes sense, right? Why would you not want a 1/4 inch on the output? You restrict your flow. These are easy questions, guys. You can hit them out of the park. Don't worry about it. So we actually recommend using those 4-foot 3/8 hose as output hoses because we want to minimize the amount of refrigerant that's left over when we're done, right? So 3/8 hose has more diameter, so we need less length to maintain the minutes release. So when you're recovering, do you guys currently go to your liquid or your vapor port on your recovery tank? 80% of contractors will say liquid. Logic is pretty sound. I'm pulling liquid out of my system. I need to dump liquid into my recovery cylinder, right? But just like how we don't want a 1/4 inch hose on the output, we want a 3/8 hose on it. On those recovery cylinders, what happens on the liquid side? Dip tube, right? That tip tube is usually smaller than a 1/4 inch. It is an output restriction. That output restriction will act like an expansion device. It will build up pressure and fight the machine. So we recommend going into the vapor port on the recovery cylinder, and when you can, when you're dealing with recovery tanks that are small enough, flip the tank upside down. You guys ever flip the tank upside down?
No.
410A charging? Right, why do you flip it upside down? You want it liquid. We're doing everything in reverse now. It still works in reverse. Shredded core removed, 3/8 in, not throttle, 3/8 out, the vapor side with it upside down. What you're going to do is you're going to pull the liquid out first. Liquid's going to fill the tank from the bottom up. Right? What comes next?
You got that much restriction on the discharge of the line that you have to worry about that?
So these tubes
I
are
see
used
it on the suction side, but on the discharge side?
for the tank.
Yeah, because that's what it is, right? It's on the discharge
Yeah,
side of your
but what
pump.
these other things that these have in them, and there's usually a filter in the bottom. So not only is it this restrictive, there's a filter that usually gets clogged up more often than not at the bottom. It can completely build up enough pressure. Not every time now, this is over a long period of time, it's slowing it down. It's enough when you're pushing 3/8 flow, essentially all liquid through it, you're trying to push it all of a sudden, you're getting it, it's gonna act like expansion and build up pressure on you. So, pull the liquid out to the vapor port, it's gonna build up from the bottom up. We start pulling the vapor out. The vapor actually gets pushed through the liquid from the bottom and actually gets turned into a liquid. The vapor gets pushed through liquid, turned into liquid. The tanks on average we find get about 10 degrees colder because what does liquid refrigerant do for us? Cools, right? It pushes off heat. Colder the tank is, the faster recovery. Anything that makes that tank colder is going to increase the overall recovery process because the law of thermodynamics says everything wants to go from hot to cold. We have a guy, like to say he does refrigeration work, freezers and whatnot. He likes to take his recovery tank, put it in the other freezer that's still working, right? Good. Yeah, colder that tank is, the faster recovery will be, the quicker it will be, the lower pressure we're dealing with. So what we're also going to do now, the other reason why we recommend going to the vapor, not the liquid port, is because when you're done, the last thing you connect to is going to be the last thing left in your hose. So if you have a tank right side up and you connect to liquid, this is going to fill with liquid, and you're going to leave liquid in your output hose and in your machine. When you connect to vapor, what do you think is going to be in the hoses? Vapor, as long as you give it enough time to pump. So what we say is, when you're recovering, you're going to have a compound gauge on your vapor side, right? And when you get down about 75 psi or so, you're going to turn your tank right side back up. What this allows us to do now is clear out all our hoses with nothing but vapor. And once you go into this, replace everything inside your hose with a vapor refrigerant. We're now using the fact that the vapor refrigerant is anywhere between 300 to 100 times less dense. So it minimizes the amount of refrigerant left over when we're done recovering, because there's always going to be some left over. We want to minimize it when we're done, but maximize it when we're pumping. Make sense?
So at 75 PSI, you flip it back over?
Yeah. We always say make sure you always turn it so it tightens the hose. And that's counterclockwise, right? The last thing you want to do is be flipping the tank upside down and then you lose your hose, and yeah, then what did you just do?
Cool off your tank.
Cooled off your face, I would say, but that's... So, this is what's called our manifold-less recovery technique. This is, we're going to show... Wow, brings me back to the 1990s. Alright, so we say we do not recommend manifolds, right? Because they increase head pressure. So how do you get from both sides of the system at the same time? Yeah. So what was on the side of the valve core tool? Right? There's a valve core in there, right? What do you think you can use to remove that valve core? Another valve core remover tool, right? So this technique uses 3 valve core tools, 2 4-foot hoses, and 1 6-foot hose. What it's designed to is to minimize the restrictions to maximize your recovery technique. Again, we're talking about small systems. The idea can be transferred over later. So what we found is you hook up your liquid straight to core, right? Core out. You're going to have your 6-foot hose stripped up from your liquid straight to the input of your machine. You're going to have another core tool. It's going to bridge from there, right? You're going to blank it off from the liquid. A 4-foot hose then bridges to your vapor port with the core removed, obviously, and then you can put your compound gauge directly onto the side of your vapor port. Have these ones purged and closed. You always want to have all your hoses purged before you recover. You're going to start recovering your liquid first. You're going to watch your scale and your compound gauge. Once you start pumping vapor, it is noticeably slower, right? We know that we're going 17 pounds per minute and we're seeing it just stream right by, and all of a sudden it's getting, we're going 1 pound, 2 pound, 3 pound, 1.1, 1.2, right? It's usually that pronounced. Time to switch over to the vapor side. We're going to pull from both. Now we're going to remove the expansion device from inside the system from the flow path by opening up the bridge. Now we're pulling from both sides of the system at the same time, going into the machine. But now that we have liquid in the tank as much as we can, it's going to be colder, which allows us to recover quicker. We put the G5 usually in front of the tank. We use that 600 CFM fan to help cool down that tank. Anything that makes that tank colder will increase your recovery speed. I usually like taking a shop towel, soak it in some ice water, put it over top. People like spraying with the hoses, whatever you want to do. But with this, we can minimize the amount of extra equipment that we need because this is all can fit into a carrying case. So we pull down. How deep a vacuum are you supposed to pull when you recover? Say louder. So for most systems, anything made out of 1993 that's not an ultra-low or ultra-high system needs to go to 10 inches of mercury to be done with your vacuum. That's why we need a compound gauge on the vapor side. I think ultra-low says 0. Anything before 1993 is 0, right? This is not a vacuum that we're going to talk about when we talk about deep vacuum. It's still vacuum, but not the same vacuum, right? To know when we're done, we're going to go 10 inches of mercury on the compound gauge and call it good. You guys have any questions on that?
Does anybody ever do that? Put their tank on the outlet of the machine, use that fan, keep the tank
I
cool?
use a fan, I use one of those, heat exchangers.
The micro transformer. That sounds like it belongs in Back to the Future. But, so, we always get that question too, because they're yellow, right? They usually get sold side by side with the G520. Do you think those are going to make the recovery process faster?
I don't know, 'cause it's smaller.
So what it ends up being,
More length.
yeah. So what ends up being is when you're pumping vapor, adding an extra condenser will make it faster because it makes the tank colder. Anything that makes that tank colder will increase the recovery speed. But those things are 1/4 inch or less, and how much line set. We're increasing the line set, which is going to slow down the recovery process. We've actually found that with a condensing unit like that on the output, it's usually slower on recovery because we have extra head hose that we have to pump through. Now, that's up to, if you have a large diameter one of those, the micro transducer is not one of those large diameter ones. If you have a large diameter one that you made yourself, try to minimize it, large diameter, try to get close to that 3/8 as you possibly can, and it's really, really hot outside, I mean, we're talking about over 100, it can help because you need a little extra condenser, but more often than not, it's slower than faster.
Has everybody seen that?
I made time out of 3/8.
Yeah, you get large diameter, again, you gotta make sure it's still a large
Wrap the
diameter,
first one around
wrap
the
it around.
saline bottle, then I did the other one around the oxygen bottle and welding the bottom,
Mhm.
and it worked really good.
Yeah, it's a heat, it's gonna make the tank colder, it's gonna increase the recovery speed.
Yeah.
Just throw a bucket, or throw a hose in it and let it run.
Yeah.
Right.
But we're trying to make it so that if you're doing a normal recovery job and it's 70 degrees outside, it's slower with that rather than without it, because we've maximized the speed in the tank because we're feeding it liquid, and then we're making the tanks work for us, and adding that extra line set's gonna be slower. That's what we found more often than not. So, I am aware, by the way, that I speak pretty quickly. So if you guys did not take notes, you don't remember exactly what I said when you go to try this for your first time, there's an entire video series on this. It's called the Manifold Recovery Technique. It's on our website. Each video is less than 5 minutes. We're talking like 2 minutes maybe. If you guys want to watch that, I have my card on the table too. You guys can email me. We got Jim, so our local rep here. You can email him. We'll come out. If you have any questions as you're going through this, you don't remember everything perfectly, just remember we want to minimize input and output restrictions, and we're more than happy to help. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay. Do you guys currently use filter dryer kits during the recovery process?
Rarely. Does anybody make a habit of that? Travis? Huh?
So from the manufacturer, we do recommend using a filter.
Screen on there?
Yeah, that's the last thing. I'll show you guys here a bench test in a second. I'll get you up and get you moving and whatnot. So from the manufacturer, we do recommend using a filter dryer kit on every recovery job, right? This is going to preserve the machine. It's going to preserve those O-rings and those seals inside the machine. It's going to add restriction. Is it going to be slower with a restriction? Yes, it is. We agree with it. It will be slower using this. Should you use one? That's up to you. You are the technician. Which is more cost effective? You know it's brand new virgin refrigerant. Do you need to use one? Probably not, right? If you're going on a burnout, do you want to use one? Probably so. Which is more worth it, your time or the machine? Right? We're going to say use it every time. Yep. So, how often should you replace one? If you start using them on burnouts, you start doing a lot of burnout, how long do they last? They are good for one job, even burnout or not burnout. They're a desiccant. They're the same stuff you find in beef jerky packets, right? They put moisture and contaminants out to keep it fresh. Same thing, it's a chemical reaction. If you recover through one and you stop it and you close it back up, do you stop the chemical reaction? No, it's going to continue to break down. There's a total number of flow it's allowed to receive, but if you just let it sit there after it's been exposed to refrigerant, it will be slower. Yes, it's an input restriction. It's going to be slower, but it also preserves your machine overall. So we do recommend it. We recommend replacing every single time, but it's definitely up to you guys whether or not you use them. Make sense? Because what happens when your machine breaks? You can do that too. Well, you don't sell the machine because we expect you to replace it every time, so we think you get the wrong message. So have you guys ever repaired one? You guys know how to use a screwdriver? Who does not know how to use a screwdriver? No? Good. No one admits to that. So yes, you can fully fill service a G5 Twin in about 20 to 30 minutes. What it ends up being... Yeah, that was a bad choice. What it ends up being is the only thing that really gets worn out are these O-rings and seals. O-rings and seals are usually designed to eventually get worn out. Usually we see between 5 to 10 years with filter dryer use and constant best practice. These can go without being replaced. What happens if you're doing a unit and it has a little piece of copper in it and it comes and it nicks your seal? It's not going to seal very well, right? It's been damaged. That's when you replace the seal. You're just replacing these two seals. This is completely isolated. You're not worried about that. And these two seals, it takes, well, how long did it take you to do the first one, Jim?
An hour and a half.
Hour and a half? Jim's slower on the screwdrivers. Usually, we're talking about 45 minutes for your first one. You do it once. Who's got the cutaway? Yeah. You open it up, that's what you see. You won't ever see that center part. It falls apart real easy. Or I guess, takes apart real easy. Anyway, you guys have any questions? Made sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect. So we have two options here. I can either show you guys real fast how to do a bench test to see whether or not you need your repair machine, or just jump right into vacuum.
I'd say do a bench test.
All right. So we have an extension cord right here. Everyone come on up. We'll do this real fast. You know, get you guys moving, get that chicken up and around.
I need more chicken.
I know.
Yeah.
All right. Real fast, guys. I promise. Stand up, stretch up, whatever it might be. So the first thing, if you guys ever, in the back of all that literature, is our factory number. If you call us during 8:30 to 5:30 Mountain Time, you will talk to our person at our factory. Right? We say 8:30 to 5:30 Mountain Time because, you know, you guys are not Mountain Time. So if you call us, you say, hey, I'm having issues with my machine. What's the first thing we're going to say? You know, we apologize, all that stuff. We've all heard it before. The next question we're going to ask you is it plugged in? This solves nearly 25% of all call-ins to our factory. Yeah, I'll give you guys a recreation here. Oh, your machine's not working. We do apologize for that machine. Can you check, make sure your machine's plugged in? Line goes quiet, line goes dead. Okay, and you hang up on them. Our next question is this cord long enough to plug in? No, we assume that because you need to use an extension cord, right? So what size extension cord should you be using for your machines?
12.
Stuff going on behind me, right? What size extension cord are you guys currently using?
12 gauge.
12 gauge, right? You guys ever seen those 14 gauges or 16 gauges at Walmart? They're a lot cheaper. Should you be using those? No. We had a guy call us up. He was actually in Tennessee. He said they burned out 4 of their motors in a month. And he said, you must have changed your motor manufacturer because the machine's no good anymore. We do apologize. We flew out there actually because that is really rare for us. We went out there, we went to their shop. They're doing transfers from tanks into bigger tanks. Found out they had one power cord here, power outlet. They ran Christmas tree lights up the wall, across the ceiling, and down the shop floor. Christmas tree lights, right, with all the lights and everything. So what happens when you have not enough high gauge extension cord? Extra amperage draw is eventually going to burn out your motor. That's why they burned out 4 of the motors. We told them you're supposed to only use either a 10 or a 12 gauge extension cord, right, to get proper amperage draw to your machine. The next question we are going to ask you, if you notice there's labels on it and everything, what size extension cord are you using? 10 or 12 gauge, right? Nice and easy. So we're going to say, is it plugged in? You're going to say, yes, of course it's plugged in. Then we're going to ask, are you on a reliable power source? How many times have you been on a job that's either decommissioning or being constructed or something weird like that, and you're not quite sure if that's a good power source? That's within the same 25%. The line goes quiet, line goes dead, right? Just because you plugged it in does not mean there's power at that outlet. Check that real fast so you guys aren't within that 25%. So, covering that basis, I'm going to plug it in. I'm going to assume that this is a good outlet. So we're plugged in. So first thing we're going to ask you, now that you're all plugged in, you know you have good power sources, does it turn on? Now, this is Jim's demo machine, so it's probably been used once or twice. We'll see if it turns on. Does it turn on? Great. If it doesn't turn on, what is it? Probably electrical thing, right? It's either, if you're sure about this power here, there could be something electrically wrong. Someone could have used a smaller extension cord. There could be something, the power switch could have flipped, right? We can diagnose that later if we need to. Usually we're going to say, does it turn on? Yes, it turned on. Great. We're going to ask, are you getting suction on the inlet? So you're going to turn on. What you're going to feel is right here. There's the suction. Right? If there is no suction, there's this screen right here. Someone was joking about it there behind us, right? that's the screen right here, comes with some spares. Right, this is our last-ditch effort to try to preserve the machine. If there's a lot of contaminants, we want it to get caught here and clog up the machine rather than destroy the internal components. If you guys see this is clogged, unclog it, blow it with some air, whatever it might be, you're good to go. You can put it back on. So, we see it turns on, we see there's suction. So what we're going to do is called the minute bench test. How long do you think it should take? Yes. It's not that hard, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to turn it on, and we're going to shut the output of the pump, right? So we're testing the seal, make sure it's sealed properly. It should be able to pressure stuff it off at 550 psi in under about 30 seconds. Under a minute, really we're looking for about 30 seconds. If it can't do that, we know there's probably a leak somewhere. If there's a leak somewhere, time to rebuild, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to turn it on, shut the output, watch the time, watch the gauge. If it's leaking, we will know almost right away sometimes. We're going to watch this, and it won't be able to pressure stuff it off. If it comes up, you're going to hook it there, right? The mass diagnostic. There you go. You turn it off, and you're going to equalize the input. So why does it turn itself off at 550 psi? Yeah, what's the tank burst at? 600. Right? Tank's burst is 600. If your machine pumps over the tank's in a bolus, it's pressure relief valve. What did you just do for that recovery? Absolutely nothing, right? So it's supposed to kick itself out. If you're pumping on a job and it keeps on kicking itself off, you're probably hitting 550 psi on the tank. There's probably an input and output restriction. Right? We've all seen those jobs. It keeps on keeping itself off. It's trying to protect you. Now, if there's a leak, when we equalize it, it's going to go to 400 psi. It should hold there. If there's a leak, it could start leaking real fast. We'll know right away. See it's holding? Good. But now we have 400 psi in the machine. A little safety note. 400 psi is dangerous. If I open this up right now, our ears would hurt. Right? You guys ever blown yourself with those little compressed air things? You're not supposed to do that. Don't admit to it. So we're going to open this nice and slowly. This machine is fully operational, ready to go on that job. We do recommend checking this every once in a while. Again, if you don't remember everything I just went through with you, there is a video. We know that most people do not read manuals. We know manuals are for wiping your hands off and using as a small protection on your knees. So we try to do a lot of videos. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? All right, perfect. You sit back down, we'll hop back into vacuum. Last couple guys, it's okay. All right, so we have no questions, guys? None at all?
I had one of the things I read on I actually read through the Appion manual, which
He's one of
is
100.
interesting. But it had a technique for cooling off the refrigerant cylinder, so if it does get hot,
Mhm.
and it involved hooking up a third line from the vapor side of the tank, so you turn it up right, so you have the vapor on the top. You pull the vapor off, run it through the machine, and it allows the refrigerant to boil within the tank and cool the tank down. Did you have any explanation on that, like how to make a better diagram or anything?
I do not, 'cause I
It's
don't
in
know.
the manual. When you get a new
Well,
one of these,
We just,
or if you have the manual, they have a bunch of different techniques for doing that.
Yeah.
Because as you know, the tank heats up and it slows down, and next thing you know,
Is
you're
it-
just sitting there watching your scale not move.
it almost sounds like a push-pull.
It was, you put a T in on the line, on the suction line going into the tank. You're going into the machine. And from that T, you tie into
Oh, okay, yeah.
the vapor side of the tank. And if the tank gets hot, you open up that T, and it pulls vapor off the tank and pushes it back into the liquid side. So you're basically just circulating it through the tank.
Yeah, that makes
Does
sense.
the tank get higher pressure though?
No, because you're taking it out of the tank and pushing it back into the tank.
So as long as you're not adding volume during the recovery
You're not
process.
adding volume, but you're
Yeah.
pulling it off the top, so you're boiling.
I'd hazard a guess here.
This is
I'm
putting a
not-
bypass
not-
on, right?
Yeah, I'm not guaranteeing. That almost sounds like a high pressure, high temperature cool off technique. I've not personally done that. I know we've changed the manual
Yeah.
3 times in the last 3 years at this point, so I can't speak to that one.
Well, anyways, it's worth reading the manual if you get it.
Yeah, we try to put some good information out there in the manual. Is what it really comes down to. All right. So if we don't have any questions, and again, if you guys want to go back, we can always go back. If not, let's hop right into evacuation. I might be the only person in the industry that likes evacuation. Usually, we get told to go do evacuation. What word comes to mind? Don't say it out loud. We're in a work environment. But yeah, right?
You get paid for it.
You get paid for it, right? However, how long does it take to do a vacuum?
Depends what you're doing.
That's the correct answer. Again, I get very concerned when someone tells me it takes an hour to do a vacuum. Here, I'll give you a pen. Look at that. Ready? Ready? All right. Bronco runs the ball. We don't throw. So I'm from Never. Oh, that's a bad. No, I can't do it. I can't touch that one.
43 to 8.
Yeah. Anyway, so how long does it take to do a vacuum?
Depends.
Depends, right? The answer is always it depends. Why do we evacuate a system? Because the government told me to, right? What happens when we don't evacuate a system?
Work back for free.
Exactly, yeah. So if we don't evacuate a system, we're going to leave condensables in the system, non-condensables. Non-condensables is going to increase your head pressure, discharge temperature, blah, 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 right? We can all read. What happens when you leave something called moisture in there? Right? You're going to build acid up and all that stuff. So they did a test. The Department of Energy did a test where they didn't evacuate a system, and they charged it fully correctly. And they found that if you didn't evacuate a system from atmosphere at standard conditions, you had an average of a 15% energy drop of a system. 15%. They added 20 psi of nitrogen in the system, a non-condensable. They found that it had a 45% drop in energy efficiency. Now, you should not have 20 psi of nitrogen ever in a system when you start evacuating, but it does go to show. If you're trying to compress a non-condensable and liquid, as we know, it's non-condensable, it's going to drop the efficiency of that system. You're going to have an angry homeowner because it's now costing them more to operate, right? So evacuation is degassing and dehydrating. So you're moving non-condensables and moisture from a system before we put refrigerant in. You guys ever deal with pinhole leaks? One or two, right? Go to a system, where's it losing refrigerant from? Okay, usually pinhole leaks. You guys ever put a hard start kit on a compressor? Right? You guys ever had a failed compressor? Why do those happen? Guesses? They're usually related. So what happens when you don't remove all the moisture from the system? Someone said it earlier. Acid, right? Moisture plus refrigerant will either make you hydrochloric or hydrofluoric acid, depending on the type of refrigerant we're dealing with. At standard conditions, 50 feet of quarter-inch copper line will have about half a cup of water in it. Right? Is that enough moisture, do you think, to make some acid? Sure. Where are these pinhole leaks coming from? We have hydrochloric acid running around in a cycle, corroding away the copper on the line, which eventually is going to make it so it's so thin that you have a small leak that develops, right? Pinhole leak. Where's the copper going to go? It goes to this system and gets deposited on the hottest part of the system, the crankcase of the compressor. You guys ever taken apart a failed compressor? More often than not, you see a lot of copper in there. There's not supposed to be any copper in here. What happens is with moisture in the system, you make acid. The acid is going to strip away the copper, right? Pinhole leaks develop. The copper is going to go around the system, get deposited on the crankcase of the compressor. So as it's cycling through, it's going to build up more and more copper. Eventually, it's going to start seizing up on you, right? That's where we put the hard start kit in. Hard start kit usually does an extra little kick for us to break that initial friction that we've developed because now we've had less tolerance due to the copper buildup. Make sense? And eventually, that's why we need it. You guys ever heard that moisture will freeze and it will clog the TXV valve with ice crystals? Well, that's not true, right? That some people out there are thinking refrigerant makes things cold, therefore if I put moisture in it, I make ice crystals. Not true, right? You make acid. The acid will actually destroy the oil, the POE oils, whatever you might have in there, which makes sludge, and that's what ends up clogging up your TXV valves. You guys ever seen the failed TXVs, TEVs, right? Even fixed orifices, they have all that stuff in it. That's usually the sludge that's developed from the acid. The acid is coming from the moisture left in the system, and the system is more operating at a less efficiency, it's gonna break, we're gonna get an angry free callback sometimes, depending on how moisture it, how much humidity is outside, all that stuff. So, why don't people properly evacuate if we have all these negative effects that can happen without properly evacuating? Why don't you do it? It takes too long, right? You guys ever heard that it takes an hour to do a system? Right? We've heard it. Oh, it's a residential system. Let it run for an hour or 24 hours, right? Big system, 24 hours. We'll just let it run constantly. We'll be fine. Is that done? No. So most people are trying to find ways to make it faster. So what Appion does is we teach, preach, and show what's called the COF methodology that all our stuff's built around. COF stands for what? See, someone knows how to read the screen. Yes. I'm going to ask you that a few times. COF is clean oil full flow. This works for any vacuum pump in our industry. Any rotary vane vacuum pump, which is 99.9% of industry vacuum pumps, right? This will increase the speed of any pump. We are designed to maximize this up. So we're going to start with flow, actually. What is this? Right? Stritters. Same thing. This blocks about 90% of your flow. What size vacuum pumps are you currently using to evacuate a system? Somewhere between a 5 and a 12, right? Some of that in that range. Are you taking out your shredder cores before you evacuate? 80% of contractors right now never remove the shredder cores, remember. So if you do not take your shredder core out before you evacuate, this will turn your pump into approximately a 0.2 CFM vacuum pump. We have a German rep. He says it's kind of like, and then on Friday night, someone passes you a beer, right? So if they pass you a beer, put a coffee stirrer in, it says you can only drink that beer through that coffee stirrer. Again, don't say it out loud. But yes, you will not be a happy camper. It does not matter how big your pump is. If you don't give it full flow, your pump will effectively become much less because that's the flow we can actually see. Don't remove the shredder core. It doesn't matter anything else that you do. Your pump is now approximately a 0.2 CFM vacuum pump. Right? It's going to take a while. So what do we do to remove shredder cores? Core remover tool, right? Right? We all have core remover tools. We already asked you. Do you guys all have Appion ones? Sure, right? What makes the Appion one different? We know we're not the only one that makes one. Yes, we're actually vacuum certified at 20 micron. We will pull a vacuum on each and every one of them before they leave our factory to 20 microns to make sure that they actually hold to a vacuum. They're designed to hold vacuum and pressure. It makes it so that we can actually pull it up with a vacuum and not leak like a sieve as long as you don't over tighten it. You notice all our stuff has this beveling on the front? You guys know what that is? Not grip. You know what compression fitting is? Compression fitting, tighter the better. This is not a compression fitting. This means it's a knurled fitting. Knurled fitting means there's an O-ring in there. If you over tighten something with an O-ring, what are you going to do to the O-ring? You're going to crush it. Right there in the heart. It's going to hurt. Right? We do get a lot of tools back with channel lock marks on them. Tighter is not better.
From the Bellevue office.
Yeah.
Finger tight?
Finger tight only. Now that's kind of variable. What we do recommend, because finger tight is kind of a little iffy sometimes, take a little dielectric vacuum grease or a vacuum pump oil. I like the vacuum grease because of the higher viscosity. It makes it stay in place. These are vacuum stable. Put a little bit along the male fitting, so when you screw this on, it helps lubricate your fittings first and foremost, because you have metal on metal, right? You should lubricate anything metal on metal. But then also the O-ring, the grease or the oil will help lubricate the O-ring and seal up any small imperfections. It makes it so they last much longer, and also seal if there's any small little nicks or whatnot in the tool itself. So the tools end up lasting longer, help seal. Away we go. Now, you guys said you do mini splits. So this is not the guy version, the lady version. We do get that question a lot. What is that?
Rose.
The rose color, right? My marketing team gets very mad at me when I say it's the pink one. This is a 5/16. The 5/16, we're going to minimize the number of connections that we have. We minimize the number of connections we have. We minimize the chance of leaking. This is a built-in adapter to it. These are for those mini split systems you guys are probably so familiar with at this point. The Daikin, Mitsubishi, LG, Panasonic. Everybody makes one. Why are they 5/16? Because of the metric system, right? Anyway, so we have 1/4 inch and 5/16. Minimize cord. So unscrew the back. All the hoses there for you. You don't need different hoses for different systems. So we teach and preach the COF methodology. Clean oil, full flow. So for full flow, we want you to estimate how much flow is going to your vacuum pump. So we do what's called the 1, 2, 3 rule. What size hoses are you guys currently using for your vacuum?
3.
Now, 3/8. Is that 2 1/4-inch hoses up to a manifold down to a 3/8?
Yes.
Yes, right? So that is a 1/4-inch hose. Right? You're pumping through 2 1/4. You've noticed it is faster still than a 1/4-inch all the way through. We do not recommend manifolds. The longer the length, the slower the vacuum. So we're not talking about manifolds here. We're just talking about if you don't take the Schrader core out, your pump is now a 0.2 CFM pump. So we're taking the core out first and foremost. If you use a 1/4-inch hose, no manifold, from the system to your vacuum pump, regardless of the size of your pump is now approximately a 1 CFM pump. Right? That's how much flow can go through during vacuum. If you're using a 3/8 hose straight from the system to your pump now is a 2 CFM vacuum pump. And if you're using a 1/2-inch hose straight from the system to your pump is now a 1, 2, 3, 1/4, 3/8, 1/2, right? This is a fast way to estimate how much flow is getting to your vacuum pump. So this way we can say if we have 2 1/2-inch hoses with Schrader cores removed, how much flow are we getting to our vacuum pump? 3 and 3, 6, right? So 2 3/8 hoses, 4, 2 1/2-inch hoses with the Schrader cores say in 0.2, right? So this is a quick down and dirty way to estimate how much flow I'm going to my vacuum pump to see how fast my vacuum pump is going to be able to go, right? Does this make sense? Nice and easy? So 1, 2, 3 rule, clean oil, full flow. This is a rule of thumb, right? What's a rule of thumb? Right? It's kind of a quick way, it's a quick guess. Actually, what it comes down to is what's called conductance. Do you guys do any electrical work? Right? You guys know what conductance is when it comes to electricity? Gauge your current. You guys know Ohm's law, V equals IR?
Just to measure how effectively molecules are transported.
Yeah.
through the medium.
So when it comes to vacuum, we're doing everything, and the flow is called conductance. It's the inverse of the resistance. Yes, someone knows how to read, right? Conductance is the inverse of the resistance, or the ability for each hose to flow. When we say CFM in vacuum, it is no longer the same CFM you guys know and love, right? Usually we have CFM of airflow, right? This is flow potential. So this does not change. So when it really comes down to it, we can see that Ohm's law looks almost just like this. When you add them together, you guys all remember this math? You know, it's either in parallel or series. You guys ever seen that before?
Yep.
Right? Same thing happens when you do vacuum. The way you set up your vacuum pump will change how much flow, conductance, goes to your vacuum pump. So we want to put as much hoses in parallel. That's why we don't recommend the manifold, because that's going to make it into series, which is slower overall. So we can go straight to the pump. We're going to go straight to the pump because it's going to be faster. Each hose, we can calculate the conductance, and the equation simplifies to this right here. All this means it's the diameter of the hose brought to the 4th power divided by the length of the hose. What that means is if we take a 6-foot hose during evacuation and we go down to a 3-foot hose, we will double our flow, right? So if we go from a 1/4-inch hose to a 1/2-inch hose, how much more flow do we get?
4 times.
We think 4 times, right? Because the diameter is 4 times greater. But actually what it is, it's diameter raised to the 4th power. This is an exponential growth factor. When you go to a 1/4-inch to a 1/2-inch, you actually get 16 times more flow. When you evacuate a system, you want to use a short length, large diameter hose for maximum flow to your vacuum pump. Now, don't get caught up on this, right? The reason why we have the 1, 2, 3 rule, because you guys can add 3 plus 3, right? Usually, I know Friday at 7 o'clock, I might not be able to add 3 plus 3 either. But we know that rule of thumb just means it only can take you so far. There's a whole science behind it. A lot of guys will ask us, what's the point of a 1/2-inch hose if there's a 1/4-inch fitting on the end, right? The service port's only so big, right? What it comes down to is each hose has its own conductance that you can calculate. You can then add it together and you actually get the total amount of flow. We want to have as much flow to the vacuum pump to increase our vacuum speed. But we can just estimate it really quickly with 1, 2, 3, right? Any questions on that? No? So we'll go through some examples real fast. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and ask them. So this is the most common way in the industry people set up a vacuum pump, right? Schrader cores left in, 1/4-inch hose up to a manifold, down to a 1/4-inch hose. What is that? 12, 2 6-foots makes 12 feet total length. Schrader cores left in. By the 1, 2, 3 rule, how much flow?
0.2.
0.2, right? If you go through all the math and parallel and series and inductance and blah, 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 you end up with a 0.29 CFM effective vacuum pump. Why is it taking so long to evacuate a system? Because you're trying to drink beer through a coffee stirrer, right? So what we recommend at minimum is using 2 half-inch hoses and 2 valve core tools. We go through the 1, 2, 3 roll. 2 half-inch hoses gets you what? 3, 6, right? Go through all the math again, you end up with a 5.75. It's pretty close. Math ended up not being exactly like life. But if you go through, that's almost a 20 times increase in flow. Do you think this would be a little faster? A little bit, right?
Times as fast.
There's the doubts. So when you go through it, that's math. This is actually the test that we did in our factory. We had a 10-ton system, shredded cores left in, 1/4-inch hose. We're using the TES 8. It's an 8 CFM pump, right? We pulled it down 5 times and took an average because time and vacuum don't correlate with each other, right? Pulled it down. We found that it took on average 40 minutes. Okay? To get 500 microns in a 10-ton system? Sounds about right? Took the shredded core out using the vacuum-rated shredded core tool. Cut our time in half on average to 19 minutes. We went from that 1/4-inch hose to the half-inch hose, shredded core removed. On average, it took 3 minutes to evacuate a 10-ton system down to 500 microns. Have you ever evacuated a system that fast? Will you ever evacuate a system that fast? Probably not. We're in Denver, Colorado. Denver, Colorado is pretty clean, dry, and tight, or clean, or dry. Just ignore it, all right? You want it, your system needs to be clean, dry, and tight. Colorado is not clean, dry, and tight. Yeah, okay, don't. Anyway, so it's a clean system. It's a dry system. It was brazed with nitrogen. It was, there's not much moisture in the air. We had previously evacuated it down to 500, 400 microns, so we're not dealing with all that stuff. Vacuum and time don't directly correlate. The amount of flow that goes through your vacuum pump will increase the effectiveness of your vacuum pump. The more effective your vacuum pump is, the faster your evacuation will become. We're taking about increased effectiveness. This can go on any vacuum pump, right? As long as you have a 3H fitting, and back of the shredded core tool is a 1/4-inch. That's why it's 1/4 and 3/8. If it was up to us, we'd have half-inch all the way through. But unfortunately, in our industry, that's not the way it is. So we can go through, put this on a vacuum pump, get more flow to the vacuum pump. Cough is clean oil, full flow. More flow means faster evacuation. Right? So, some examples. So this was a guy actually using the TES 8. He had 50 feet of copper line. 1/4-inch copper line, shredded cores left in. Right? So he said this was his manifold. The reason why he had this is because now he can put this anywhere he wants. We know the equation says short length, large diameter. Do you think he's getting much flow to his vacuum pump? If you actually go through the math, he ends up with a 0.09 CFM vacuum pump effective.
That guy carried that around?
Yeah, he bundled up, put it in his truck. He told us that the TES 8's no better than any other vacuum pump. We came out, this is what we saw. Shredded cores left in by the 1, 2, 3 roll. How much flow would you estimate? 0.2, right? Not the same, but pretty close. So we came out and we're like, listen, short length, large diameter, more flow. Full flow for maximum effectiveness. So we hooked the TES 8, same pump now. It went from 24 hours down to 2 hours. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 half-inch hoses. By the 1, 2, 3 roll, how much flow is that? Times 3, 15, right? We can estimate 15 CFM. That is not true. Actually, what this one ends up being is about 6.13 CFM when you actually go through all the math. There's a slight discrepancy between the 1, 2, 3 roll and actual math. And what that is you can never be greater than the CFM of the pump. That's where the pump CFM comes into play. However, we also know the more hoses you put on a system, the faster you will evacuate the system. So we're okay with that. Because remember, vacuum does not equalize. We're used to pressure, right? Imagine this entire room was full with people shoulder to shoulder, blind, right? One guy pushes another guy, pushes another guy, pushes another guy. They're going to hit that wall. That's pressure. Pressure's going to equalize. You add pressure, pressure pushes. Vacuuming is now opening up that exit, right? First people to leave are which ones? Close to the door, right? They're going to leave. Everybody else is going to feel that there's less pressure this way, and they're going to try to make their way towards that exit. But eventually they could get caught and things like that. It's not going to equalize a little deeper the vacuum we go. How do you get more people out of the room faster? More exits or bigger exits, right? You open up more doors, you can get more people out faster. The wider the doors are, the easier it is for them to get out. Same thing comes to vacuum. So we're okay with the 1, 2, 3 rule not being perfectly true, but we want as much flow to the vacuum pump as possible, as many hoses, short length, large diameter, and the reason why he's using copper is what?
You can put it anywhere you want. Oh, yeah.
That's why he was using long copper. What it is a lot of old school guys, we train for refrigeration to use copper because it's non-permeable,
Yeah.
right? So that's why we actually have the hoses that are vacuum certified at 20 microns. We will pull a vacuum on each of those. So we're actually the only one that will say we have vacuum rated hoses because we're the only one doing the actual little process. That's why it's okay to use our hoses for evacuation because they're designed for evacuation. Does that make sense? All right, we'll do another quick example here. So this is actually Duke University, I guess the other side of the country, right? Server room getting serviced every 3 years. In and of itself, that's a lot, right? Why? It should be the question.
Oh, that's a levered XTP, they're fixing leaks.
So, there's 4 servers in their server room. It took 24 hours per server to pull down. Just evacuation side, right? So 4 days for this evacuation part of this job entirely. So we came in, we have 1, 2, 3 half-inch hoses, which gives us what? 3 times 3, 9, right? So we can estimate 9 CFM. So we do all 4 servers in 7 hours. More flow, the faster you go, right? We've now had these hooked up straight to the pump. We get increased effectiveness. I think this one ends up being about a 6.07 CFM when you do the full math. This one's 6.33. Right? So more flow, the faster you'll go. So last one, I swear, guys. So this is actually in Indiana. This is the husbandry plant, refrigeration cycles, right? So they were taking, what, 23 hours to pull the system down in the factory, brand new, right? We pulled it down in 2 hours. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 half-inch hoses and 1 3/8 hose. How much flow are we getting for the 1, 2, 3 rule?
14.
Right? Yeah. We can estimate it. We know it's not true. We know more flow, the faster you go, more hoses, faster evacuation, right? Make sense?
What is that picture?
This is a oracular in the husbandry plant. Husband.
Oh,
Husband. I can't say it right. Don't quote me on the thing.
Your manifold has a ton of,
Yeah, this is our old manifold.
but that one you have doesn't have gauges on it, so you have tons of ports to go into.
This is the inside of that without an analog manifold. It's the same thing. We discontinued our analog manifold because you can't maintain the accuracy of analog manifolds. So the same thing, this is what our vacuum manifolds kit is. That's actually what this is. This is called our Speed Kit V. I heard you guys were fighting over one previously. These are essentially 2 half-inch hoses, 2 shredder cores. So these are our basic kits. This is 1 half-inch hose and 1 core tool, right? Megaflow kit comes with 2 half-inch hoses, 2 core tools, 2 3/8 hoses, and then the half-inch bore manifold. Everything is vacuum certified down to 20 microns. Right? So it makes it so that you can put more hoses on a system, more hoses put on a system, the faster you evacuate. We try to make a starter set. It comes in this carrying case right here. Everything's half-inch, vacuum certified, more hoses, faster flow. Right? You guys can look at that, ask any questions you want on that. Okay.
Have you used yours, Matt? Yeah. You did? Yeah. So we got a couple of those floating around service, and I think, you know, for like special projects, those guys that are doing those big VRF jobs,
Yeah.
that should be on everybody's truck.
That's what we're doing, pulling 100.
So at minimum, we usually recommend having at least 1 or 2 of the basics kit, that's just a little bit more cost effective when you look at a total for larger jobs. If you guys are doing VRV, VRFs that only have like 2 service ports, you really don't need the basic kit because this has 4 hoses. If you only have 2 service ports, you don't need the extra 2 hoses. So it kind of comes down to you to balance it out. We have this and it's both 1/4 inch and 5/16. I don't think we have that one in 5/16 yet. But again, works on any vacuum pump. What this comes down to, if you don't have the TES, it comes with these 2 adapter hoses. So you can put our manifold set onto another vacuum pump with a 3/8 connector. So you can get all the hoses on your pump because most pumps don't have this many connections that you can put on it.
What's the kit you just recommended if you're doing VRFs and you only have the 2 ports?
So if you only have 2 ports, it's called the MGA BRO, or that's the 5/16. It's not actually in here, but it's real.
MJ.
MGA BRO. So the one with the 1/4 inch is called, it's on page 12.
Mega Bro?
Mega Bro. Don't ask me about that. I've made issues with that. So the 1/4 inch is called the Mega Basics, BAS, and yeah, it's called the Mega Bro. Whoa, we'll get worse into that here in a second. Our marketing team's fun. But for,
Remember, they haven't never met Garth, so
you haven't met Garth yet. Gosh, we have an ex-cowboy as my boss, so.
ex-Dallas Cowboy linebacker, yes.
So
Mega bro. He
lets you
down into
he is the Mega Bro. He's big enough that you don't say it to his face. Anyway, so either Mega Bro, Mega Basics, or this one if you want the carrying case with it too. So it kind of comes down to you. We try to make things universal. All right. So usually we're talking about going so much faster, and we have this nice thing called humidity up here in Washington, right? So have you guys ever heard that if you pull a vacuum too quickly, you'll freeze the system?
Yep.
Fact.
It's a fact, right? Can you freeze water with a vacuum pump? Oh yeah, you can, right? Right now you can pull up videos and show me where you freeze water with a vacuum pump. How do you freeze water with a vacuum pump?
Science.
These are the two scientific terms we're going to go over real fast, right? It's called the delta H. This is the entropy change. So if you have about 1 inch or 1/2 inch of standing water and you're pulling a vacuum on it, it's going to start pulling the vapor off of it. Each vapor molecule you pull away from it will take a little heat with it, right? You take a little heat with it, makes the remaining of the standing water turn in a little colder, right? Next we have what's called the Joule's effect. You guys ever heard what the Joule's effect is? This is a fancy way to cool down soup. How do you cool down hot soup? You blow on it, right? Cools it down. Same overall principle. As you start pulling away these vapor molecules, the rest of the vapor molecules that are still there will expand rapidly, and essentially you're cooling down hot soup. These two things working in conjunction with each other can eventually cause the water to freeze, right? So Joule's effect, and then we have the delta H. However, to do this, you need right about 1/2 inch or 1 inch of standing water in the system. Just about right about there, right? Because what happens when you have less? It instantly boils off. If you have too much, the mass of the water will prevent it from freezing. So you need to have that, right about the same, 1/2 inch to 1 inch of standing water. So can you freeze water with a vacuum pump? Yes. Is it likely? If you do, the question should be, why is there 1/2 inch of standing water in your system? Yeah, that's where we're doing all the different things now. That's what you're supposed to do. Maybe not use a vacuum pump. Maybe let's use some dried nitrogen to try to sweep that away first, right? Don't have that much water in your system in the first place. What happens when you mix that much water with POE oil? Yeah, you're going to get some nasty stuff. POE oil is hygroscopic. It's going to suck in the moisture really hard. And now when you get down to a deep vacuum, you've added a lot of work to your job. So if, let's say, you do freeze water with a vacuum pump, someone said hurricanes. There's been 1 or 2 of them in the news lately, right? And you evacuate a system and it freezes because it has a lot of water in it. There's a guy that was actually in Tennessee, called me up. He said he's worried about freezing the water in the system. And I said, why is there much water in your system? Oh, I'm installing my system and it's raining. You guys know the joke about the doctor, it hurts when I move my arm like this? And don't move your arm like that. It's like, well, don't braze in the rain, right? Fast solution. We have to braze it. We're okay with it. Well, you're going to have a lot of issues going down the line. It's going to get worse, right? It's okay. We'll deal with it later. They have expected time for evacuation. We're just going to have to get it in. All right. So if you do freeze the water with the vacuum pump, you will eventually get what's called sublimation. So that's when you go straight from a solid to gas. So I'm from Denver, Colorado. If I get hungry and I go to make pasta, my water will boil at 197 degrees Fahrenheit. Where does your water boil at? Why the difference?
Pressure.
Yeah, I'm at a higher atmosphere. Higher atmosphere, lower pressure. Lower pressure means less boiling point. As we continue to pull a vacuum on a system, say we get down to 2,000 microns, water will boil naturally at 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Yes, sublimation is a slower process than just having not much moisture in the first place, but if we continue to pull a vacuum on it, we'll allow the water to eventually just sublimate and move on. We can add heat to it. We add more heat to it. We're going to make it so it can be at a lower temperature. That way it makes it evaporate. So we're not really concerned about it. If you're worried about it, there's something else you need to fix first. Don't let that much water in your system to begin with, right? Dry nitrogen in the system will help sweep it away. You can pull evacuation on it. We're not too concerned with it. When we say pull a system down as fast as possible, we're not worried about it. Questions on that?
You don't break it with nitrogen, triple evac anymore?
Oh, we recommend that, yeah. We'll get into that here in a second.
Why is it after you break it with nitrogen, do you notice your microns drop so quickly after the second and third pull? on a triple evac.
That's why it drops faster each time? Because it's a little cleaner each
Imagine
time.
it freezing and letting off, that's what I've always been taught or thought.
Freezes and letting off.
In other words, you're pulling deep vacuum, you're pulling it off, but whatever's left is frozen and you're not pulling off that anymore? Or
Because
it's pulling out of the
because it
oil.
freezes,
really.
it drops quickly, because it's like it doesn't see it until you purge it with nitrogen and then it evaporates it again.
It's,
Bring it
so,
back to atmospheric.
like I said, there's always the short answer and then there's the long answer. We can get into the long answer, but we'll talk about it here in a second.
Because I was also told that a lot of the times you still have quite a bit of refrigerant left in your oil if you got a big system. and
It's
you pull
possible.
the
That could,
refrigerant out.
usually what ends up happening is the micron gauge, you'll see jump up and down. If you're doing that, you purge it, yeah. Because a micron gauge is doing a snapshot of what it's seeing per average of time.
Yeah.
So you can see sudden spikes because it could get a big thing of suddenly just pull through it.
Because your first pull, you watch your microns come down real slow, then you burp it, you bring it up, let it sit for 15, 20 minutes with nitrogen,
Mhm.
just above, pressure. Then you start your vacuum again, you watch it.
Yeah,
You watch
because it's
it drop quick.
once it's a cleaner system, it's less contaminants going past per second, less contaminants
Has
per
nothing to
second.
do with freezing moisture.
It does and it doesn't at the same time. Again, a lot of the vacuum stuff gets really complicated, so
Right, well, that's
we
what
can,
I'm asking.
yeah, we can
Is
talk
that
about
what-
that in a second, because, yeah, anyway. But other than this, you guys have any questions? Other than that, you have any questions on this? It's the proper prepositions, I suppose. All right, what does cost stand for?
Clean oil, full flow.
Yeah, right, nice and easy. So what do you think we're gonna talk about next? All right, so we all know full flow. So how often do you guys change the vacuum pump oil on your vacuum pumps? Every time?
2 or 3 times during evacuation.
So what if I tell you, nationwide, the 3 most common answers when I ask contractors, regardless of refrigeration, residential, commercial, whatever it is, how often do you change your vacuum pump oil? The 3 most common answers? 1, they'll laugh, right? Silly Appion guy doesn't know that we're not changing our oil, right? Happens every time. Number 2, usually the next common answer is, when it falls over in my truck. I gotta refill it, gotta put new oil on it, right? Number 3,
When the guy at the parts house buys you a hot dog?
yep, counter day. You change the oil for me. How often should we change our oil? Have you guys heard the rule of thumb? Change your oil after every use? Right? We've all heard that? What if I tell you that's wrong? We've all heard that, right? Change your oil after every use.
What's the use though?
What's the use, right? By that rule of thumb, change your oil after every use means the guy working on a 2.5 ton system and the guy working on a 5,000 ton chiller uses the exact same amount of vacuum pump oil in their vacuum pump. Does that make any sense? No. Change your oil after every use is for vacuum pump maintenance. It has nothing to do with operations whatsoever, right? How often should you change your oil? When you need to, right? What is the vacuum pump oil? What does it do for us? 3 primary things. Moisture and contaminants. Seals, most important one. One more.
Cooling?
Some use it for cooling, but that's a design thing. Lubrication, right? It's moving parts, you need to lubricate it. Usually lubrication is the first one people get. That's also why we get at least 1 TES 8-pack a year full of motor oil under warranty. And they say the pump's no good. We say, why is there 10 to be 40 in there? They go, oh, oil is oil, right? It's lubrication. At least 1 a year. I think we're up to 2 this year. Right? No, absorbing the moisture and contaminants and sealing are what makes it more important. But why do they say change your oil after every use? Have you guys ever seen the inside of a sump on a vacuum pump? Have you ever changed your oil and watched it kind of bloop? I think bloop is the word you use, right? Comes out big chunks or something like that. They made the rule of thumb, change your oil after every use because you're going to pull moisture contaminants out of the system. It's going to settle to the bottom of the sump, right? This is a metal sump with moisture sitting on it. What's going to happen? It's going to rust, right? So you corrode the bottom of it. You need clean oil to evacuate quickly. If your pump is rusted and you put clean oil on it, is the oil clean anymore? No. You guys ever notice your pumps go bad after a while? Even when you're religious about changing your oil, eventually it goes bad because eventually it will build up all the sludge and contaminants in the pump, which prevents clean oil to go into it. It makes it so you can't evacuate quickly anymore or efficiently anymore. A lot of guys say, well, I just use the sight glass to tell when I need to change my oil. What's the sight glass for? Oil level only. Sight glass is at the top, contaminants go to the bottom, right? This is not going to tell you what your oil conditions are going to look like. Usually there's a piece of folded metal in there that's going to tell you where your oil level is easier. It's not going to say what your oil actually looks like. Make sense? So, Appion says, well, we know COF, clean oil, full flow, is important. Why is it important? Full flow makes your pump more efficient. And when the pump sealing on a rotary vane vacuum pump, remember, 99.9% of pumps in our industry are rotary vane vacuum pumps. These are named by engineers. What do you think a rotary vane vacuum pump is going to have? A rotary vane, they're not very creative when it comes to naming things, right? The oil will go along the wall, so when the vane hits it, creates a seal, so it can whisk away more or less the contaminants from the system, right? Make sense? So we need that sealing ability of the oil to be able to create the vacuum. The seal is making our vacuum. But you guys know what vapor pressure is? Ever heard that term before? Vapor pressure, if you want to visualize it, think about a lake really early in the morning. Sometimes you get that mist rising off of it, right? That mist is the vapor of the water rising off the water. All liquids will naturally have a vapor pressure. Some solids do too. It's interesting reading. So that vapor pressure, you can measure the pressure as it's trying to exert away from the liquid. So the oil, which has a low vapor pressure, which allows it to be a good sealing oil, starts off, and then you put the contaminants into the oil. You put more and more contaminants into the oil. You will increase your vapor pressure. You're decreasing its sealing ability because the vapor pressure will actually push the vane away from the wall more and more. When you push the vane away from the wall, you get what's called back leakage. The contaminants will now slip by. You cannot get a vacuum below what the vapor pressure of your oil will allow. So that's why COF, clean oil full flow, it's all about keeping clean oil in your pump so it can create a good seal. You guys seen the TES before?
Yeah.
Right? We have one right here, so you've all seen it. So its primary feature, biggest benefit over anyone else's pump is what? Change my oil, right? Pop it out, put a new one in, and away we go. Simple, right? You keep clean oil in the pump becomes exponentially faster because we have a greater seal. The better the seal, the more contaminants you can pull out quickly. We talk about sometimes when you burp it, and you can see it pulls down a little bit more each time. It's less load on it, essentially. But the cleaner the oil is, you'll watch it pull down faster and faster. So we always say, think about the oil kind of like a paper towel. If someone were to spill water on the floor, they're going to hand you a paper towel, right? You're going to start picking it up. What happens once that paper towel is saturated?
Doesn't pick up anymore.
It doesn't really pick up much. So what do? You have two options, really. You can go get another paper towel, or you can put that one, squeeze it out, put it out in sunshine, let it dry itself off a little bit. Yes, you can sometimes squeeze it out, get a little bit more use out of it, put it outside in the sunshine, let it dry itself off a little bit. That's what happens when you use oil as a heat sink. You're actually using it to try to boil off moisture. We say it's much faster to grab a new paper towel. That's why we say just change the oil, and you will watch an exponential increase in your speed. Clean oil, full flow, faster. So that's why we have these little cartridges things, right? We pass around that cartridge. See the cartridge? Ooh, ah, right? So this is a nice, easy way to change it. But there's also now becomes one more thing. This is a visual diagnostic tool. We're adding one more tool to your tool belt. So, do you guys braze with nitrogen? Over half the contractors in the United States do not use nitrogen. What happens when you do not braze with nitrogen?
You know that black shit on the inside?
Yeah, that stuff's called capricious oxide, right? The fancy word of the day, right? So if you do not braze with nitrogen, you build up the nice black stuff, right? Capricious oxide. So what we want is we want you to braze with nitrogen capricious. Copper is Cu.
I'm gonna call it capricious.
Capricious. Don't, yeah, whatever. Yeah, you know me. It's the end of the day. Come on, guys. So if you do not braze with nitrogen, you get this nice black stuff build up in it. You're going to see that in your oil when you remove it, right? We're going to pull it down. You're going to watch your oil turn black, right? So we can tell when we go on a job, we pull the vacuum pump, turn it on, it's going to start turning black, and we turn to the guy who's standing right next to his boss, and we say, hey, are you brazing with nitrogen?
Every time.
Every time, right? Never fails. We usually have a distributor right next to us, and we say, hey, do you buy nitrogen from this guy right here? They go, oh, yeah, yeah. How much nitrogen do they buy from you a year? A tank. For how many guys? 20. Are you using nitrogen? No. It's usually how it ends up going. So we know over half of them aren't doing it. And we can visually see because we can watch it pull out, right? or see it pull out the capricious oxide into the oil. If it's really humid outside like this, right, what happens to the oil? You're going to watch it turn this milky white color. It's getting wet, right? That's going to tell us there's moisture in the system. We can use this as a diagnostic tool. So,
How many people have those TEZ8s, Tez 8s?
Travis?
We had it, but I gave it to Travis.
Stole
There's really only one in here?
They're ordering them as they come in
Yeah.
at the children, they're just not.
Supposed to be ordering them now, that's.
Because I
supposed
know
to be
there's a bunch in
default.
Portland, and I've seen a bunch in the tool room, so I figured there's more.
Well, everybody store them in tool room.
yeah. So, some examples of this new tool in your tool belt, guys. What's this? You pull on a system, you watch your oil, when it turns this kind of grayish color, what's that?
No nitrogen.
That's your capricious oxide, right? You didn't braze with nitrogen. Number 2? Yeah, a lot of moisture in the system, right? Moisture's going to tell you something's going on. What about number 3? This is a system down in Alabama. The system was left exposed to the atmosphere for a month, right? They pulled the vacuum on it. This is actually algae coming out of the system. Do you think some algae in a system is going to affect the way the system's going to operate?
It's good for it.
Oh yeah, it likes it, right? It's biodegradable.
Organic.
Well, number 4.
It's slippery.
They probably super well with that.
So this was a job that I did actually downtown Cherry Creek. Brand new system, installed with nitrogen pressure tested, dry, evacuated. It came out in this yellow color. We were with the distributor. We said, hey, what is that? And they go, oh yeah. We started putting, the manufacturers of the compressors started packing their compressors with an anti-corrosion inhibitor because when it shipped from China, right, they're having corrosion issues. So they started packing it up, and we're finding more and more of the oil turns yellow because it's pulling out that anti-corrosion inhibitor. There should only ever be 2 things inside a system when it starts up. Oil and refrigerator, right? Should there be a corrosion inhibitor in there? No leak? Well, what's number 5? Yeah, they were looking for a leak. They could not find a leak, so they added more leak check. They couldn't find a leak, so they added more leak check. They could, that's a lot of leak check. I'll tell you that right now. Number 6. So number 6 is actually down in Houston, Texas. This is a job. We did a training just like this. They loved it. They're great. They were using the TEZ on a system, package unit on a system. They installed it record time. They're all happy. They had a call 2 weeks later. System's not working. Well, that doesn't sound right. Right? So they go on the job. They start looking. They can't figure out what it is. So they put everything back together, start pulling them out, and the oil comes up. Particles are getting pulled into the oil. So they found out that the brand new filter dryer they put in the system, brand new, dissolved and clogged up the TXV valve. Right above here, you actually can see that shadow. That's the filter dryer. That looks like a cone. I don't know where they put it on, but this told them what was going on in the system. It's a window into the system. When you get a window into the system, you can see what's going on. This can tell you to diagnose. Can you fully evacuate systems that look like this or this? No, you're using the wrong thing. Vacuum pumps pull out molecules. If your system pull out and looks like that, time to stop and do other things, right? If you have a lot of moisture in your oil, can you pull the system down? Yes. What happens when there's a lot of moisture? Like if it's sitting through, I don't know, a flood from a hurricane? Are you going to evacuate that system? Yes, you're going to drain it. You're going to get rid of the oil, and then you can put new oil in it, right? There's other mitigations you have to do. Vacuum pump's not the design tool for that. So this is actually a job in downtown, or south of Denver. This is a geothermal job, right? They had 1,400 feet of line set. It got broken, and it got flooded with water. They run that job for 2 weeks trying to pull a vacuum on it. They changed the oil at the beginning of the day and every end of every day, and it came out milky white. They were about to get kicked off that job, right? Customer's not happy. So he's at his local distributor. You know, we're based out of Denver. He's talking about this horrible job, and the guy goes, hey, no, Appion's just around the corner. Let's give him a call. So they called us up and said, hey, will you mind coming on this job with us? We like going on jobs with you guys. We said, sure. So we came down. We drove down south. We hooked the vacuum pump, clean oil, full flow. We had to change the oil 16 times in 90 minutes. That's a lot, right? However, we got the job done to 250 microns in 90 minutes. Oil's like a paper towel. The bigger the spill, more paper towels you're going to use. And my favorite story is the guy called up and told me he was installing a mini split for a basketball player's house. A brand new construction, right? He's really excited about it. High profile job. He wouldn't even tell me what state he was in because he said it gave away too much information. So he's got his clean oil, full flow, he's ready to go. He's got his 5/16 core tools. He hooks it up, turns on his pump, and he watches oil instantly turn milky white. Like instantly. What is that telling him? Moisture in the system, right? Well, instantly is a little unusual. So he goes, well, that's not normal. So he pops it out, puts a new one in, instantly, milky white again. What's that? A lot of moisture, right? Well, I'll do it one more time. He's checking for leaks to make sure everything's nice and tight, nothing else is on loose or anything. Goes on one more time, 3 times the pattern, pops it out, puts a new one in, instantly milky white. He goes, all right, something's wrong.
What did the con say, Mike?
Worse than that. So, blanks off his system, right? So he's not going to lose his spot in case he's doing something stupid like that. Who knows? Goes around, turns off his pump, goes around the construction site, starts asking all the guys on the construction site, did you mess with my system? Did you mess with my mini split? Did you guys mess with my system? What did he find out? Apprentice plumber on location. Apprentice plumber told to pressure test copper lines with water. What does the mini split look like? Copper lines, right? The entire system got flooded with water. Can they evacuate that system? No, it's too much water, right? But they found out in 5 minutes what most people would not have found out until they tried to set it up. Who paid for that system?
Plumbers.
The plumber did. Do you think that guy was the star performer for the day for saving his company a mini split on a high-profile job? Because what would normally happen? You put on your vacuum pump and you walk away for an hour and you come back and call it good, right? It takes an hour to do a vacuum. So, what were we missing in that story? Most common way to set up a system, 2 1/4-inch hose up to manifold, down to the 1/4-inch hose to vacuum pump. What tool am I missing? Micron gauge. Everyone's got a micron gauge, right?
No.
Right now in the United States, over 60% of contractors nationwide do not own or use a micron gauge. 60%. What are the warranties like, do you ask your distributors? Yeah. So, this is called the AV760. When it comes to changing your oil, how often should you change your oil? As needed. How do you know you need to change your oil? 2 ways. You can watch when it looks dirty, right? But the oil is a high-grade synthetic micron dry oil. It does cost a little bit more. Lasts a bit longer. It's about 5% longer, 5% more expensive, twice as long. So you want to get the maximum effectiveness out of each cartridge of oil. That's where you use the micron gauge. AV760 is a full-range measurement gauge. We call it looking for stall-outs. So you got clean oil, full flow. Where does a micron gauge go? Do you put a micron gauge on a vacuum pump? Why not? Yeah, what are you testing when you put a micron gauge on a vacuum pump?
Performance of the pump.
Of the pump. Are you checking the system? No. Should it go on a manifold? What if you put it on a manifold, where's it checking? Your manifold and your hoses, right? You want to put it as far away from the vacuum pump as possible, since the vacuum pump is more or less a perfect vacuum. It goes on the side port of the core tool here, so you can blank it off when you do a leak-off test. We call it looking for stall-outs. So we have clean oil, full flow. You're going to watch the vacuum pull down very rapidly, and it's going to slow down to the point where it's more or less not doing much for you. And see the oil looks pretty dirty? Pop it out, put a new one in. You're going to watch it come right back down again. You're usually going to change your oil more at the start of the job than at the end of a job, because you get more non-condensables contaminants out at the start of the job than the end of the job. But it's more important to have cleaner oil at the end of the job because it allows you to get to a deeper vacuum. That's why we want to measure the full range. That's why we have the only certified, accurate, full-range micron gauge on the market. We're actually NIST certified. It's the National Institute of Standards and Testing. That's what NIST stands for. And we will measure it all the way down, and we can tell exactly when to change our oil. So, the question then becomes, how do you know when your job is done? Yeah. What standard do you guys use to tell when your vacuum's done? Say it was 500 microns for... Okay. So that's close to, I think that's the ESCO group, this 10 to 15, right? Triple stage evac recommended, pulled below 500 to 250 microns, hold for 10 to 15 minutes, right? ASHRAE says to pull to 500 microns. That's not stringent enough. We do not recommend that one. You guys know what Title 24 is for California?
Hear about it all.
You hear about it. Why? Because eventually it's going to make its way to the rest of the country. They say you have to triple stage a vacuum, triple evacuate a system, pull down to 250 microns, and it has to hold for 24 hours. Yeah, it's California, right? They're going to do their own thing. You guys, you do, yeah, Daikin, mini splits now, out of the manual, They say for a Daikin system, you're supposed to triple evacuate, pull below 500 microns. It's got to hold below 500 microns for an hour. So just so you know, Walmart follows Title 24. That's what I've been told.
Yeah, right.
They're supposed to. LG. So there's various different standards. So which standard do you think we recommend following? We recommend following whichever standard applies to you. Because you guys are in Washington, right? You follow whatever your boss tells you to go to. You follow whatever your customer asks for. And you follow the hardest standard to get the best results. So if you're not in California, you don't need to follow California Title 24. If your boss says pull the 500 microns, hold for 10 minutes, yeah, that's probably good enough. But if you're in California all of a sudden, because you guys are union, you guys can get moved around, right? What does California say? Which standard do you think you're going to follow in California? If you're working on a Daikin system, if you're working on a Mitsubishi system, whose standard do you follow? Whichever one applies to you. You don't want to follow Daikin's and say, oh, Daikin says to Mitsubishi, because they are not very happy with you, right? So we say follow the hardest one to do, and you'll usually do right by yourself. Okay? So we're doing the blank off test. How do you know when your vacuum is done? You pull the 500 microns and you hold. What about the rise? You guys would you guys call it blank off test or rise test here? Is it leak testing or
Decay?
Decay test? I wouldn't call it decay. So people call it different things. We call it blank off test because we're blanking off the system watching a rise. So we get this call a lot. I pulled the 500 microns, I blanked it off, and I watched it rise up to, say, 10,000 microns. And kind of stabilized there. What's going on with my system? There's something left in it, right? The moisture contaminants have a vapor pressure. Moisture can vary between 50 and 20,000 microns depending on how hot it is outside. Other contaminants can also increase the vapor pressure. If it comes up and stalls out, that means there's contaminants left over in the system. What do? You either get triple evac, you pull your vacuum pump back on, something, right? You just have contaminants left in the system, turn it on. If you do your blank off test and you watch it rise all the way back to the atmosphere, what is that telling you? You've got a leak, right? How can you pull a vacuum on something with a leak? You don't. You go fix the leak. Yeah. So that's why we actually have the AV760. So you can measure the full range up and down. Because if you have a leak from the start, if it's a large enough leak and it starts pulling down, what you're going to see is it kind of just bobs there. Because we're actually actively measuring it from atmosphere, right? If it's pulling down, it's doing something like this, what's that telling you? I'll pass it around. You guys can do it yourself. If it's just bobbing up and down up from the top of the atmosphere, there's a leak. Find the leak. We have people that forget caps. Things aren't quite tight enough. You didn't put vacuum pump oil. Something's not closed, right? We've heard about it all before. It's going to tell you that way. If you don't have a micron gauge and you hook it up, turn it on, walk away, are you sure there's a leak? Or not? No, right? So we're going to pull it down. We're going to look for those stall outs. We're going to get down to it. We're going to see it. Have you guys had the AB760 before? Or seen it? Used it?
Anybody? Because we have two of those that have been floating around for testing.
It's in my truck, man. I was
Okay.
meaning to get it to you.
Oh,
Fair
check the
enough.
battery in that.
If it's on or off, we're going to find out. You get 420 hours usually operating time on it. So, yeah, probably. We've had a few that way. They're just AA batteries. Nice, easy fix. Because what's the number one complaint we have with micron gauges? Unreliability, right? We are the only one that is measuring the full range following a standard, the NIST, the same thing that both NASA and Intel are using to calibrate their micron gauges. Now, their micron gauges can go to 10 to the negative 16 power. Do we need to pull a vacuum to the 10 to the negative 16 power? No, they're evaporating dust particle off microchips. We're never going to get that deep, specifically because we have oil in the system. We're not trying to evaporate that, right? So actually, the reason why we have a micron gauge is because when we originally were testing the TES, right, how do you test a vacuum pump? Micron gauge. How do you test a micron gauge? That is a circle, that is not a test, right? The only way to test a micron gauge is with another calibrated certified micron gauge. That's how we found out about NIST. That's why our factory went out and bought a $10,000, there's abouts, NIST certified lab quality micron gauge. Do you guys want to buy a $10,000 certified lab quality micron gauge? Yeah.
Probably not.
We'll sell it to you. No, we don't recommend that. So We started testing with that. We found out a lab quality micron gauge made for testing in the labs are not the same as using for HVAC industry. We're a little bit too rough on micron gauges. We had to get it recalibrated a bunch. So we went out and we said, oh, we can buy cheaper micron gauges in our industry, right? We went out and bought every micron gauge in our industry. And we tested it versus the NIST certified gauge. What is called is NIST traceability. So you trace it versus the NIST gauge to see where they are relative to each other. And we found out that every gauge in our industry would read anywhere between 50 and 10,000 microns when it's supposed to be reading 500 microns versus the NIST gauge. We could not find a single micron gauge that read the same reading for an entire day for more than a week. So what we did is every day we came in, we pulled it down. Well, 500 microns today on this micron gauge is 7,000 microns. Next day, 500 microns is 800 microns. Next day, 500 microns is 1,400 microns, right? It's all over the place. So our owner said that's unacceptable, so that's why we made the AB760. It's a 10-point certification from atmosphere all the way down to 1 micron. It's nice and tight so it doesn't fall out of calibration. And what's the other complaint about micron gauges?
Break.
They break all the time. Who's ever broken a micron gauge? So we have the only certified accurate micron gauge in the industry, and also, so they're called IP65 rated. So I can pass it around to all you guys. I'm sure one guy's gonna drop it, right? IP65 rated. I think the new iPhone's IP64. So that means it's water and dust resistant. You can actually use it in the field, and contractor resistant. Note the word resistant, right? We're not saying this is waterproof. We are not saying this is contractor proof. You guys can break anything, anyway, anyhow, right? So it's resistant. If you guys want to go on our website and watch our durability test, we play hockey with it. It's called our Canadian test. We throw it off a roof. We put it in a toolbox, right? But if you run it over with a truck, do you think it's still going to work?
That's warranty, right?
Yeah, maybe. So we found usually the AB760 will cut warranties in half. The reason for that is we get a reliable reading for the certified accurate thing, and you guys are doing large jobs, right?
Yep.
Large jobs. How do you prove your job is done? Micron gauge, right? So we're Bluetooth connected to the app on the free app on your phone. You can download each gauge's NIST certification. So you can show, oh, this gauge got calibrated on this day by this person. This is its 10-point calibration. Gauge calibrated. If they're asking for it. Next, they're going to show, well, how did you do that job so quickly? Well, here's my entire job report. I'll do the data logging, and I'll send you the CXV file. You can show that I needed to change the oil 4 times on this job. That's why I billed you for 4 oil changes, right? And they can show that I got to 422 microns. I held it for 10 minutes without more than a 10 micron rise. Here's my test. Boss, owner, whatever, whoever you're giving it to, right? Title 24, they can audit you. This is California now. This is eventually going to come its way to the rest of the country, probably. In Title 24, if they audit you and you can't prove that you did what you're supposed to have done, they will shut the building down. So they don't go over the yeah. So the whole thing comes down to, well, how do you get the mom and pops to do everything cheaper to not do it cheaper? You take away their customers. If you go to a Walmart and say, oh, we can do that for $100, say, and then they can't prove it once they're audited, they'll shut the entire Walmart down until they fix the HVAC system. Do you think they're going to get that customer back? No. So that's AB760. We use that with clean oil, full flow. That's how we evacuate quickly. We measure it when we're done. You guys ever heard about using compound gauges to measure microns?
That's old school.
It's old school, right? We have guys that still like to say, oh, compound gauge, it's a lot cheaper. If you're trying to use an analog gauge to measure microns, this is like measuring an inch with the odometer of your car. The gauge arrow is about 50,000 microns wide. Right? Doesn't have the resolution. You guys know it's the old school way. Analog gauges are not accurate enough to measure for microns because they have a lot of built-in errors. We don't actually recommend analog gauges anymore. We discontinued all analog gauges from our company other than for rough readings because we find out they're not accurate enough. They can't maintain their accuracy for things like parallax error history. So you ever heard these terms before? Every day, right? Well, I do too. So, we'll talk about capricious. We'll talk about real fast. You guys know what parallax error is? Capricious. Here's the fastest test for parallax error. Cover my head with your thumb. Hold it out of your arm. Just cover my head. Close one eye. Close the other eye. Did I move? Yeah, we have two eyes. Parallax error is human error, the way we interpret things. That's why we go for digital, not analog. The way you look at it is different. And then hysteresis. You guys know the Bourdon tube? Bourdon? Right? This piece of folded metal inside of an analog gauge. Every time you use it, it deflects. That's how they work. Every time you do it, you essentially get metal fatigue, and it has a different reading. If you actually compare it versus a NIST-certified gauge or an AMSE 40.7 or something like that, you'll actually see that when it's supposed to go up to the same reading, it's going to come down. You get these weird graphs. You can look it up. Yeah. You can just zero it out. Do you actually know that that zero out method, that's actually just a wobble screw? If you calibrate it to zero, you've actually just not measuring anything anymore. You're supposed to calibrate with a dead weight. There's all sorts of things. We can get into that way too much. So we just say, you know, the analog gauge does not have the accuracy. You don't have the precision to be able to accurately tell when your vacuum is done or anything else. So, as conclusion now, guys, we're almost done. Have you ever heard you can pull a vacuum and it should take an hour? Right? We've all heard that one. That's using time. Using time as a vacuum is not a vacuum gauge. You will not know when your vacuum is done. Yeah. Have you guys heard about the pitch change?
Sounds good.
I'll just listen to my pitch change in my vacuum pump. That's actually when you go from degas and dehydration. Right? That's when you, if you stop it when you hear a pitch change, it's usually where you just stopped it at the most important part of any vacuum pump. And then you guys know beer can cold? Beer can cold is a bad method for charging. Some people are using it for evacuation. We know the Joule's effect is going to make it so the pipes feel cold. If you hold the thing and you feel for it, we've heard about holding the silver bullet cans against it. We're from Colorado. We've heard that one a few times, right? The pipes will get colder as we evacuate, but that does not mean the evacuation is done. Without extra measurement, doesn't matter how fast we do it, how correctly we do it. If we don't measure it, we're not done properly. All right. You guys have any questions? Questions? Anything? Again, that was a lot of information, guys. I do apologize for that. I know I talk quickly. I'm trying to make it so you guys get out here faster. If you decide to go and try out any of this equipment, if you have any of our equipment, or go try out any of these methodologies, back of the literature, factory's phone number, our email address. Jim has his cards. I don't know if you have cards here.
I got cards.
Jim's got cards. I got cards on this table. Reach out to us. Ask us questions. If you ask questions, you can't get answers, right? If you don't ask questions, you don't get answers. So if you want to talk to me, you can email me. I do this all across the country. If you call me, you're more likely not to answer than to answer. But if you shoot me an email, I'll at least probably get it to you back within 24 hours. Unless it's a Friday, then Monday.
In a pinch, can you just use normal back pump oil?
So we do get that question sometimes. So the whole thing is that our oil is a high-grade synthetic oil that's hydrophobic. What that means is that we don't absorb the moisture when it's just sitting out in the atmosphere. And we're micron dry, which means that we start at a vapor pressure around 0.1 microns. We're a super high-grade, low vapor pressure sealing oil, right? So can you use other vacuum pump oil in our vacuum pump? Yes.
I know you can.
You can. So the idea is, we always say it's kind of like a Ferrari. You guys ever do that drive a Ferrari thing at Las Vegas, right? Can you put 92, 98 in, or 82 in a Ferrari gasoline?
Sure.
Sure you can. Do you want to?
I'm just running it, so yeah.
Yeah, right. So you won't get its maximum performance out of it because the sealing ability makes it so it can last longer. What we usually find, you can put this vacuum pump oil in other vacuum pumps, and because it seals better, it will increase the performance of other vacuum pumps because of the low vapor pressure. Also because of the hydrophobic nature with other vacuum pumps, they use it as a heat sink, so they try to boil the moisture out of the oil that makes it last longer. Again, wringing out that paper towel. Makes it so it works really good in other vacuum pumps as well.
It'd just be a pinch, because it's too much pain in the ass to fill all those up.
Yeah,
But you
well, that's
can
why
get those like
they
that,
come
right?
they come pre-charged like
It's just
this.
easier just to switch that thing out.
Yeah.
You don't want a gallon jug.
Yeah, but I can take that oil. and
No,
put it
you
in
just buy that by the case.
Yeah, you can buy these. I think we sell these in like packs of 3.
My JV pump, right?
Yeah, that's what you
Still
said,
be
yeah.
fairly better.
I'm just saying Friday, you're trying to go home and be right, you know, that's
Yes.
obviously milk eaters, and all you got is JV for.
Clean oil is what you want.
Full flow.
Just wanna see you guys.
Yes. So yes, it's not going to avoid the warranty or anything, but you're not going to get the maximum effectiveness of your pump. We don't recommend constant use. We do some of them. We do recommend the JV one if you're in a pinch because it's at 10 microns. It's usually the next best in the industry. We're at 0.1. They're at 10. We're about 100 times lower vapor pressure. We're okay with that one. There's some in the industry that we don't want
That's
touched.
black-
It,
black magic, those.
it's,
The black gold from
Black-
JB,
That-
okay, it used to be the yellow jacket Ritchie reps. I wouldn't use that oil on my dead car, so
yeah.
I mean, you know.
If it looks milky to begin with, there's a lot of particulates in it sometimes that can do damage to the pump. So if you're at a pinch,
JB. No,
No, yellow jacket. They sell an oil, Ritchie sells an oil, not so good, seriously.
Are the core removal tools serviceable, like the O-rings and things?
yes. So all our stuff is serviceable. So usually the number one thing that has to be repaired on the core tools, the O-ring in the front, right?
Yeah, mine too.
So you can buy I think it comes with 2 when you buy it, and you can buy all the O-rings you want. There's also a full rebuild because there's 2 Teflon seals inside as well as a ball valve and the other ball. So there's a full rebuild for 2 in a pack that you can do. I think this literally is put in a vise.
Yeah.
And then we have instructions on how to do it and all that stuff.
Most of them.
Yeah, I have noticed on that oil, when you buy it in bulk, the
Mhm.
sticker doesn't come with the container.
Sticker
Like
doesn't-
if you peel that
Yeah,
outer coating off,
It's
now
gonna
it's
be-
just a clear jug with no label on what's in it.
yes.
Violates DOT regulations.
No, I haven't.
I now put a tag on it, you know, if it's not, say it is. I'm just
Well,
telling you, what safety
no, that's
Steve
good.
tells me.
That is good to know. We blow these in our factory, so I'll pass that on and let them know. If we can put maybe something on the bottom or whatnot. We'll see, I'll see what I can do with that. You guys have any other questions?
So I have some hoses.
I might say it doesn't.
I have some of these,
That'd be nice.
So these are gonna be the 4,
We're on here, we're always gonna.
Oh, yeah, what are you?
and I have some of the,
so these are the 4,
I want one.
get back.
so these are our 4-foot output hoses, by the way. These are the ones that we use for either the bridge or the output.
So leaving a Schrader core in restricts flow by how much?
A lot.
Leaving a Schrader core in restricts flow by how much?
It'll do it down to 0.2.
I don't think you asked the question.
I'm asking a percentage.
On what side?
90%.
2
Oh, now Shane got it. So do you want a hose or a core remover?
Or both.
Well, do you have a core remover?
Yeah, I'll take the hose.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't need a core remover.
I can.
Who's doing mini split work? Probably SPTI guys?
He needs one. Dan needs one.
Well, who would use the
Yes,
pink? This is
Dan.
the rose one. Is it-
Not the pink, yeah.
I have to use one of those freaking fittings just to.
Would you guys use this for SPTI? Alright,
So we actually have a story. We were up in Ann Arbor. You guys are union, right?
yeah.
Did anyone of you guys go to the Ann Arbor show or whatever training conference this year?
So,
Probably did.
what?
So we were actually at the Ann Arbor one doing this training there as well. Daikin was doing a training on their mini split they were doing a repair on their VRV training system.
Yeah.
It had issues during the transportation, so they were trying to fix it with the TES, right? They were on it apparently for 2 days because they only had the 1/4 inch, they didn't have the 5/16. They said, I was talking to the guy, he said, oh, we thought it was a leak, we couldn't get it done, we were working on it for 2 days, got the hoses, just didn't have the core tool. I gave them a 5/16 core tool, they got it done in 20 minutes.
There you go.
So it's a big difference on those mini
I
split
got another
systems.
question. A 3/8 hose has how much more cross section than a 1/4 inch?
4 times.
4 times.
16 times.
4 times 4, right?
1/4 inch hose
9.
compared to a 3/8. The cross section
Oh, that's 4 times.
is double.
Double.
Remember that?
Double.
Double.
It's about double. You're thinking about half inch.
You need a core remover tool?
No, I need that big one now.
Well, you have to arm wrestle. Oh wait, I got one right here. I had another one. All right, who else could use one of these? I think Noel.
Hey, what does NIST stand for?
What is what?
NIST.
1980 spring break check.
Does anybody else need an Appion core remover?
I would like one.
I don't have an Avian. Yeah, I just.
I'd like
I don't have
Well, we were showing that manifold, this thing, and then he had 3 of them, and I only have 2, so.
I have 2, yeah.
All right. So I got another one. You want an Appion?
Thanks, Beth.
All right.
So for the recovery, you guys notice the hoses come with those little red caps?
Yeah.
There is a gasket in them because they're still vacuum certified as well. On an output size, you will have a little bit of refrigerant left over in them. The reason why we have the little red caps is if the the gaskets get cold, or in other words, you blow refrigerant through it, they can sometimes get smaller and pop out. So for shipping, we have that in there too. Something to be aware of, usually adding core tools on the back.
Where'd this one come from? I guess I got one more.
Makes it makes them last a lot longer.
Yeah, didn't you just get some in your tool? Didn't they give you this? Is that it? No other questions while he's here? Burning questions about recovery or evacuation that you always want to know?
Oh, I think it was great.
Yes.
All right.
Hopefully you guys learned a thing or two. Hopefully I didn't talk too much and stumble over my word. You guys learned capricious.
If you got any questions, you want to come up and look at any of this?
You guys can come up. You guys can check it out.
If
all
you
that
didn't
stuff.
sign in, remember to sign in. If you're not on the list, add your name. Capricious.
Capricious. Did I say capricious?
Capricious oxide on the
I know, I remember that.
So if they need that, what do they do? Just call you? And then what? You'll come replace it?
You guys can replace it, it's no big deal.
Oh, you just bring them in?
I'll just bring them in.
micron to lower.
Typically, I don't do it, but I've got this little repair.
Okay.
It's no big deal.
I'll let them know. Ask your question or you need to Chris.
Exactly. Chuck just retired a few months ago.
Yeah.
That actually makes more sense.
You know, you guys can play around.
Do you know the difference when you
Thanks, guys.
JB vacuum pump they gave
On the Skype.
you?
Hey, that guy was an RSD. Hey, Travis?
So these are our charging tees. So we don't recommend manifolds. So this is actually our complete manifold set. These are just little test cylinders. Thank you, sir. These have a little test cylinder on them so you can actually see what it is. So when you go to charge a system, this can go straight on the system.
I guess from sale.
That's straight in there. And then you can sit on there. And then you have these little angle things so you can get them on different angles.
Yeah.
What is this? Yep. So 3/8 here, 1/4 inch here, and 1/2 inch here. Unless you're doing a really
I
big system.
have two more.
Well, you can still get 3 hoses.
But then we can get
Most of the systems I work on.
that's what we're
At least
saying.
3 to 4.
I got
what?
The new.
I've been seeing those Appion.
The other ones we do get are vacuum, certainly.
Are they the yellow jacket ones?
You know,
Yeah, I find when I'm doing
I just
back,
grabbed
I'll send
everything.
most of my lists are-
That research.
I always have a tendency to overtake.
Yeah, that's what we're trying. We don't recommend it.
Better than that, yeah.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah.
And then if you end up using these two, there's a flush procedure.
I ordered one
Once in a while,
but it's not
we
this one.
recommend, we'd have to develop it for bromide systems. If you take everything off, put a core tool right on
Jimmy and
here.
Eric are still.
You really run with clean oil, and the core tool is just
Waving at
almost
Jimmy
sealed
Gonzalez.
closed. Let it run about 10
We
minutes.
was with Grayson and he
builds
was
a
trying to
restriction
pull
there
the
with the
shredder
heat
core
up a
out.
little bit.
Shot